Wooden country houses have a special atmosphere of tranquility and coziness. They often evoke pleasant memories from the distant childhood, summer, cottage, trips to the river with friends, fresh strawberries, which you pluck right in the vegetable garden. However, wooden houses have one significant disadvantage. They are easily inflammable. One spark from a fire, an unexhausted cigarette butt, or a small short circuit in the wiring is enough to make the whole building burst into flames like a match. What exactly had happened in his case, Damien didn't know, and frankly, he didn't care much about that right now. The only thing he was thinking about was how to get out of the flaming building. The sophisticated locking system on the cottage door seemed to have malfunctioned and locked him inside. As soon as Damien noticed the fire, he rushed to a window, then another, but to his horror found bars on each of them. Modern security methods, expensive alarm systems, police arriving in 5 minutes. The bars on the windows are probably more effective anyway, Damien thought with annoyance. All he could do now was call the fire department, cover his face with a wet rag, and wait patiently for rescue, trying to stay away from the blazing flames and acrid smoke that were quickly filling the rooms. He sat near one of the windows with his back against the wall, and to be honest, he didn't believe he would live longer than a few minutes. There was still one hope left for him, though. No, not the firefighters. Damien was sure they'd never make it out to the middle of nowhere in time. But there was a reason he was in this house, which didn't belong to him, but to his good friend and business partner Adrian. The latter, for some reason, was ungodly late for the meeting, but he could show up at any minute. What could he do, though? He wasn't really going to drag his friend out of a burning house. Damien probably wouldn't do it himself. He's got a family that's going to be left without a breadwinner. The spark of hope that had flared in his soul faded as quickly as it had appeared. Now all of Damien's thoughts turned to his family, or rather, his daughter. She was an adult, but she still needed his help, his tutelage, his guidance, even though she would never admit it to herself. And who was it that made her so stubborn and willful? At the same time, she does not know how to handle money, neither to save, nor to invest, only to spend. It is clear that she is a woman. She needs all kinds of cosmetics, beautiful clothes, and some other things that he, due to gender differences, do not understand. But not in such huge quantities. All this is needed. Whether it was because of this, or for some other reason that Damien couldn't determine, his relationship with his daughter was unimportant. She'd become jumpy, sassy. Even as a teenager, she hadn't been this difficult. And now, apparently, they wouldn't be able to rebuild trust. Suddenly, a noise distracted Damien from his thoughts. The crackling of the fire kept him from listening, but he was sure someone was near the house. He wanted to shout, but realized he'd already inhaled the smoke, and his voice wouldn't listen to him. Then, with his last strength, the man drummed on the wall. Hopefully the people walking around outside will hear him and distinguish this sound from all the others, Damien thought. "Hey, is anyone out there?" came someone's unfamiliar voice from right above his head. Damien tried to answer, but only coughed convulsively. Apparently that was enough. Unlike the knocking, this sound was clearly identifiable as human. Wait a second, came the same voice from above Damien's head. There was a crackling sound. Not the kind that came from the raging flames, but a ringing, metallic sound. A second more, and he heard the thud of a heavy object hitting the tiles around the house. Then another, a little quieter. Apparently the unknown guy had ripped out the grate using a makeshift lever. Leaning against the wall, Damien struggled to his feet. His head felt like a fog, and he felt wobbly. He looked up and saw a hazy silhouette against the window opening. "Give me your hand," the stranger shouted. Damien, not really knowing what he was doing, straining with all his remaining strength, held out his hands, both of them for some reason, and felt someone squeezing them and pulling him upward. At that moment he realized he was saved, and consciousness left him. Damien must have woken up just a few minutes later to someone splashing cold water in his face. When he opened his eyes, he saw the concerned face of a young boy of about 20, but maybe 25, in front of him. "Well, thank God," he exclaimed. "I thought I was too late." "Thank you," Damien wheezed. "What's your name?" "Alex," he said. "Thank you. Alex, I don't know what I would have done without you." "How did you end up here?" "No reason," he answered evasively. "I was fishing on the river nearby." Damien was finally able to look at his rescuer with a more meaningful gaze. Tattered clothes, holey boots. "Fishing? How?" "Unless I was trying to catch fish with my hands so I'd have something to eat," he thought. He did not, however, voice it. Why offend a man who had done nothing wrong to you, but had literally saved you from certain death? He wanted to answer something, to keep the conversation going. But then his jacket pocket vibrated suspiciously. Damien didn't even realize at once that it was the phone. which he had habitually set to silent mode for the duration of a business meeting. He glanced at the screen and saw that Adrian was trying to reach him. "I'm listening," he answered briefly. "Dude, here's the deal," the receiver said verbosely. "I'm late. First I got into a traffic jam, and I just got out. The car stopped and won't budge." "Yeah," Damien said thoughtfully. "No luck today. I've got some not-so-good news for you." "What do you mean?" "I don't know how to put this delicately. Have you checked the wiring in the house lately?" "Why?" Adrian's voice didn't sound surprised or concerned. "The fact that you don't have a house anymore," he blurted out, deciding not to pull the cat's tail. Somehow it burned down like that. A fire started. "I don't know what caused it, but I'm guessing it was a short circuit. I'm sorry, I thought you'd rather hear it from me now than come to the ashes unprepared."
"I guess you're right. Wait for me, please. I'll try to get there as soon as I can."
Damien hung up the phone and thought hard. Alex stood beside him, looking at him anxiously and seemingly searching for any signs of ill health. The businessman was struck by such concern from a complete stranger, who probably had enough problems of his own. Besides, he was still thinking about his daughter. But how to establish a relationship with her? How could he set her straight? Damien looked at Alex once more, and an idea that seemed strange but still made sense came to him. "Listen," Alex, he began cautiously. "I'm sorry to be blunt, but I can see you're not a rich man, to put it mildly. Probably in need of money and a place to live, aren't you?" "I won't take money," the boy said flatly. "I didn't bring you out here for that, did I? I'm not offering you money. Well, I mean, not for rescuing you. I have a business proposition for you." "What's that?" Alex became wary. "I see you're a good guy, kind. And I have a daughter, you know. In principle, she's not a bad girl either, but with a wind in her head, so I thought you might be a good influence on her. Are you trying to match me now?" "Well, that's a long way off, I suppose. But yes, I suggest you get to know her, talk to her, have a relationship, and then it's up to you." "You know, I think I called you an ambulance for a reason," Alex said skeptically. "I think you inhaled too much smoke. But what kind of relationship can I have with a businessman's daughter? What are you talking about? She won't even look at me." She will. Dress you up, comb your hair, you'd look so handsome. You don't need to tell her you're homeless. I'll rent you a car, pay your rent, and other expenses on top of that, for the movies. It'll be your job. You don't need a car, that's for sure." "I don't know how to drive," Alex answered. Despite the fact that he didn't like Damien's proposal, he seriously considered it. He didn't want to deceive the girl, but in his situation it seemed to be the only chance to get money and a place to live. He needed both, not so much for himself as for his ward. Alex knew that the street was a cruel, merciless place on his own skin. He was a young, energetic guy, quite capable of standing up for himself, but there were people here who could not boast such skills. One of them was Matthew, whom they had run into by chance a few years ago. Alex had just graduated from the orphanage and was barely grasping the basics of vagabond life. His new acquaintance was old enough to be his father, if not his grandfather. He never talked about how he ended up on the street, but the boy was sure that it was due to some fatal accident. Matthew was nothing like the typical vagrant. He didn't drink at all. He was pretty weak and often sick. Not exactly the best set of tools for surviving on the streets, especially since in this harsh world it is not customary to help each other. Quite the opposite. Other homeless people saw Matthew as a competitor. They could take away his food, all his money, and drive him away from the warm place he had found. Alex felt sorry for the old man, and he decided to take him under his care and protection. He helped as much as he could. To the best of his modest abilities, he got food and medicine. And to all those who were very interested, he explained that this man was his grandfather. Of course, that wasn't true. But it was a logical explanation for their strange union. "So you agree with everything else?" Damien asked slyly, snapping Alex out of his troubled thoughts. "Well, we could try," carefully he agreed. "That's great," the businessman hummed. "Well, I'll call a driver now. Go with him to the store. Look for some clothes, something decent. And I have to wait for my comrade. I'll take care of business, and we'll go straight to my daughter's." "Maybe I'd better stay with you," Alex asked timidly. "I don't understand anything about these fancy clothes. Maybe you can give me some tips." "It's a waste of time," Damien dismissed him. "It doesn't matter how fancy you dress. You're not a girl. The most important thing is that the clothes are new and expensive." With a heavy heart, Alex agreed. He didn't want to leave the businessman alone. He felt uneasy about him, as if he had a bad feeling about him. He didn't like the fire very much, It didn't look like the house had caught fire from inside because of faulty wiring or something else. Fortunately, his fears were not justified. As soon as he left the store, the driver informed him that the chief had just called. What's more, he had already made it home. His daughter was there too, and both were waiting for the arrival of the groom. Alex felt a strange shiver in his knees. This whole thing kept bothering him. He didn't like it, but there was no choice. As they pulled up to Damien's house, Alex marveled at its modesty. Sure, it was a large 2-story cottage with a very impressive lot, but he had expected something grander, a real mansion, like the aristocrats in the history books. It was how he'd envisioned the life of the rich. The sight of a large and well-built, but quite ordinary, no-frills house even somehow calmed him down, but it didn't last long. The door opened after his call, and a young girl appeared on the threshold. She looked not at the guests, but behind her back. "Daddy, I don't need you to bring any suitors to me," she said loudly. Alex realized this line was not really meant for his father, but for him. It was a warning. Don't get your hopes up, boy. I'm an independent girl, and there's nothing in it for you. Emily, please remember the rules of decorum. Damien's voice came from the back of the house. We have a very serious young man here. You're embarrassing him. The girl sighed and turned to face Alex. He mumbled some prearranged greeting, and their gazes met. At that moment, Emily smirked faintly, but he was stunned. He realized that he had seen her before, and that she recognized him too. He had extremely unpleasant memories of their first meeting. Look, what a guy! A shrill female voice rang in his head. What guy? Just standing there on the corner, some hobo. Emily gave him a scornful look. Several of her friends were with her. The whole company shamelessly stared at him, as if he was not a person at all, but some object of interior. However, Alex suspected that in their picture of the world it was true. So what if he was a tramp? Said one of the girls with a laugh. But he's cute. Would you kiss him, Emily? Emily looked at him again, her expression unchanged. Why would I do that? She asked. Her friends began to answer her question, laughing and throwing snide glances at Alex, who was blushing. He was no longer listening to what was going on. Instead, he tried to get away from where he was standing as quickly as possible. And now that very same girl was standing on the doorstep of Damien's house. She was the one he had come to pretend to be a rich and promising fiancé. And naturally, he was immediately exposed. He could tell from her smirk, from her surprised and mocking look, that she, too, remembered the incident. But Emily, surprisingly, did not pretend to know him. She felt sorry for the poor guy. Or maybe it was guilt. Or maybe she just didn't want to cause another scandal with her father. Anyway, she calmly extended her hand to him and politely introduced herself. Alex answered her in the same way. Together they went into the hall, where Damien was already waiting for them at the festively set table. A casual small talk ensued. In the end, the older man either got tired or decided it was time to leave the young people alone. Either way, he bowed politely and headed upstairs to his room. At the same moment, a friendly smile fell from Emily's face. She listened warily, and when she caught the sound of the door closing, she was furious with Alex. What kind of circus are you running here? I can understand, father, but what are you doing here? Don't you have anything better to do? Emily asked. The boy looked at her dumbfounded. It wasn't that he'd expected a warm welcome, but this sudden change of tone had thrown him off balance. He never would have thought it was possible to fake it so well, and even almost believed in Emily's benevolent attitude. Alex was embarrassed. He didn't know how to approach the main thing. After all, it wasn't just for the money that he'd agreed to Damien's offer. There was another reason, more serious and sinister. He saw Emily as his ally in the predicament he was in, but how could he convince her of that? Look, I'm going to get off to an awkward start. I apologize both for this, as you put it, circus, and for what I'm going to tell you next. Alex began. But I can't not do it. Your father is in serious danger, and I don't know how to help him. That's why I agreed to the adventure. I thought you could do it. Okay, wait, Emily interrupted him. What kind of danger are you talking about? Let's start from the beginning. I don't understand. You see, it seems that they wanted to kill him. And not just wanted to kill him, but tried to kill him, Alex answered. I overheard a conversation between two people who wanted to get rid of their business partner, and in a rather harsh way. Burned alive right in the country house, where the negotiations were to be held. Allegedly an accident. Emily listened to him with a mixture of disbelief and horror, but did not interrupt him again. I heard everything, the date and the time, so I went to this very house today. Only I was a little late. It was already on fire, and if I hadn't known there was someone inside, I never would have guessed. Anyway, I got him out this time, but something tells me those people won't stop until they're done. Why didn't you tell your father? Emily shook her hands. He would have believed me. But think about it. On the one hand, his business partners seem to be trusted people, friends, probably, as he calls some of them. And on the other hand, I'm some stranger, even without any serious evidence. That's true, Emily said thoughtfully. But you seem to believe me, don't you? I do. You know, I've had my suspicions lately, too, that someone wants to hurt my father. I don't know anything specific, just a feeling or something. Alex felt like Emily wasn't telling him the truth, but really, was it any of his business? He warned her, which means his conscience is clear. We'll see how it goes from here. So Emily said, after a moment's silence, I suspect that this is not the only motive that brought you to our house. Your father must have promised you money for playing the rich groom. Yes, he did, Alex agreed, seeing no point in hiding the obvious. Well then, shall we pretend, she smiled, and keep an eye on Daddy, do you agree? At least for a month, and then we'll see. I agree, he nodded. Emily must have been able to play up her father's enthusiasm for her new acquaintance. At least Damien thanked Alex and told him he was doing a good job. He nodded curtly and asked about the promised apartment. I've already taken care of that, Damien replied, satisfied. Here are the keys, the address. Thank you, Alex tucked everything into his pocket embarrassedly. He was very embarrassed to accept such gifts, and he would have done fine without them himself. Except that Matthew had been sick again lately, and it would be better for him to be warm and cozy. Damien stared intently at the boy's actions. That's odd, he stretched out, giving up the car. Clearly you were uncomfortable with it, and an apartment would seem to be a more expensive thing. Alex looked him straight in the eyes and realized it was better to tell the truth at once, so that there would be no unpleasant surprises later. I didn't do it for me, he admitted. My grandfather is sick. There's no reason for him to be out on the street. Damien didn't say anything back, just nodded his head. Alex took that gesture as approval of his action and hurried to leave. He couldn't wait to take Matthew to his new home. Only then he would have to tell him all the details of what had happened, and he wasn't sure that his grandfather would approve of the adventure he'd embarked on. And so it was. Matthew shook his head and said that the whole story wouldn't end well. Nevertheless, to Alex's great joy, he didn't refuse to move from the street to the apartment. Besides, having received from Damien a certain amount of money for current expenses, the guy managed to buy his ward some medicine, Alex went to Damien's house again. Now these visits became his daily duty. Moreover, he spent more time here than anywhere else. As much as he could, he and Emily pretended to be a couple in love. The boy kept a close eye on everything that was going on in the cottage, and quickly found out the reason for Damien's disagreement with his daughter. The situation turned out to be trivially simple. Emily's mother had died when she was still a baby. For a long time, her father raised her alone. But a few years ago, he finally managed to let a new woman into his heart. Emily, of course, was not happy about this development, but at first she treated her stepmother very tolerantly. After all, she was an adult and realized that Daddy could also be lonely and wanted a woman's warmth. He couldn't really spend the rest of his life mourning her unhappy mother. However, Angeli, so called this woman, as soon as she appeared, began to establish her own order in the house, and in every way to show that the mistress in the house can be only one. The 20-year-old Emily was clearly not suitable for this role. A grown-up girl, she said with obvious irritation, you could go to work instead of sitting on your neck. You could go to work too, instead of sitting on my father's neck, Emily replied in her tone. No, look at her, she's going to be sassing me. Angeli was indignant. I've got the whole house on my back. It hasn't fallen apart without you, Emily retorted. They were having more and more of these sorts of confrontations, and each time they did, they became more and more bitter. Damien tried not to interfere, hoping that the women would be able to work things out on their own. Both of them were dear to him, and he didn't want to ruin his relationship with either of them. Emily already resented this attitude. It seemed to her that if Dad wasn't sticking up for her, then he was really on Angie's side. That's why all her conflicts and her defiant behavior had started. But the man, as it often happened, was unable to think of such an obvious reason. Alex, even though he was watching the situation from the side, was clearly not in a hurry to give his employer advice. Firstly, it was, in fact, completely none of his business. Secondly, he doubted that he would listen to him. Well, all right, in that case, the family problems and without him somehow decide what they do with all this. However, several times his determination not to interfere in family affairs was seriously tested. The thing was, as he got to know Emily better, he began to realize that the girl wasn't really as bad as he had first thought her to be. Yes, indeed, she was the rather spoiled daughter of a successful businessman. Except that wasn't the whole truth about her. She clearly loved her father, cared about him, showed kindness, and was capable of noble deeds. After all, she seemed quite well read and at some point took it upon herself to correct the gaps in Alex's education. The boy himself did not notice how he began to feel a special sympathy for her. Anjali, on the contrary, did not cause him any warm feelings. Arrogant, rigid, greedy. She took the arrival of a guest in the house as if the girl she hated had brought another of her kind with her. The legend that he was the son of some of Damien's influential friends didn't convince her otherwise. It seemed to Alex that she tolerated Damien himself in the house only because there was nothing she could do about his presence. No love or affection, or at least just the usual respect he'd seen from her. Emily obviously felt the same way, and therein lay the true reason for her dislike of her stepmother. Several times Alex witnessed very unpleasant family scandals, but in most cases he managed to avoid participation in the squabbles. However, one of the days it happened that the guy could not stay aside. During a late breakfast, Damien went to the kitchen. Either his wife forgot to bring him a spoon or something else. He returned somewhat dazed, holding something that looked little like a cutlery in his hand. "I found this in the trash," he informed the audience, showing off the mysterious find. For a few seconds, Alex couldn't figure out what he was looking at, but then he realized it was a pregnancy test, and 2 stripes were clearly visible on its surface. So it was positive. He glanced at Emily, but she only looked dumbfounded. She shook her head. Her father's attention turned to her as well. "How do you explain that?" he asked. "I'm surprised," the daughter replied. "It's not mine." "Well, it is," the stepmother caustically inserted. "It was some stranger who broke into our house to do a test here, throw it in the trash, and then quietly go about her business." Actually, Emily blurted out, "I'm not the only woman in this house." How hard it is to believe that sometimes, but there was no point in me hiding the pregnancy. Unless, of course, it happened, Anjali parried. Emily, Damien repeated, raising his voice slightly. "Stop breaking the comedy. Who's the baby by?" He glanced suspiciously at Alex. He wasn't sure how to respond, but at least he was sure he had nothing to do with anyone else's pregnancy. "Once again, for those of you who are particularly gifted, it's not my test. And I'm not pregnant." Emily cut him off. Damien Alex began cautiously. "I think Emily is telling the truth." "I'm the boss at home," Damien shouted openly. "I'm not paying you to think something, and I'm certainly not paying for my daughter to have children by who knows who. Not by you?" "You know what?" Alex couldn't stand it. "I wasn't hired to listen to such insulting suspicions either. You'd better pay attention to your wife. She's only thinking about how to throw Emily out of here, and then you with everything you've got." With these words, he quickly got up from the table and then ran out of the house. Alex himself didn't know how long he wandered the streets, trying to calm down. He understood his behavior was stupid and simply unforgivable. He was not only responsible for himself. What would happen to the apartment where Matthew lived now? He was about to go back to Damien's house to apologize for his breakdown, to find out what the situation was like there, to see if they'd sorted out the unfortunate test after all. But at that very moment, the phone rang in his jacket pocket. He picked it up and heard Emily's concerned voice. "The latest news is, don't come into our house just yet. You can't come in here. Don't worry about your grandfather. No one's going to kick him out on the street." "Is your father really mad at me?" Upset, Emily said. "You tell him I'm sorry." "I really shouldn't have." "He's not mad," Emily interjected. "He's not mad," Emily interrupted him. "He's in the hospital. He had a stroke. He's stressed out. All they said at home was that they wouldn't let you see your father. I didn't even think to go." "That's terrible. Is there anything I can do to help?" "I don't know. Just keep your head down for now. I'll call you again." "Okay," Alex answered and hung up. He was completely confused, not knowing what to do. He wanted to go to Damien's hospital, but decided that wasn't a good idea. In the end, he just went home, buying some groceries for him and Matthew on the way. He wasn't used to spending money, so he still had some left over from the advance. The next few days passed in anxious anticipation for Alex. Emily didn't call again. Must not have had any news for him. At times it began to feel like all the recent events were just an obsession. A strange dream, bad in places and good in places. Giving up the habit of wandering the streets was harder than Alex thought when he was in the apartment. The walls felt like they were pressing on him all the time, and he wanted fresh air, so he often went for walks, spending a lot of time out of the house. If it wasn't for Matthew, he would hardly go back there at all. And on one of these walks, a couple sitting at the table of a street cafe caught his attention. They were discussing something heatedly, interspersing their talks with kisses, which were on the edge of decency. Alex didn't even immediately realize why exactly they interested him. He was about to pass by, but then the woman turned to him so that he could see her face properly. It was Anjali. That's when Alex realized that he knew the man too. He'd seen a glimpse of him when he'd driven away from the unfortunate burned house, but it was unlikely he'd ever be able to forget. It was all becoming clear. This was the same friend and companion of Damien's that had tried to burn him alive. Without a second thought, the guy pulled out his cell phone and dialed Emily's number. "I have news for you, and I'm afraid it's not very pleasant, but expect it," he said. "Oddly enough, I have some for you too," the girl retorted, "but let you go first." He told her of the scene he had observed just 5 minutes ago. "Wow," Emily exclaimed. "You wouldn't believe it. Anyway, I've been thinking about how to make Daddy feel better, and I decided I should bring him a note from the clinic that I'm not pregnant so he'd at least stop worrying about it. Anyway, the doctor informed me that it turns out my stepmother is expecting the baby." "The doctor said so?" Alex was surprised. "Well, yeah, he knows we're kind of the same family. So he told me I was going to have a little sister or brother. I didn't tell my dad so as not to worry him too much, and it turned out to be a good thing." "Yeah," Alex stretched out. "The baby's not his." Both of them thought the same thing, but neither of them voiced it. Now both Angie and Adrian had even more reasons to get Damien out of the way as soon as possible, and now that he was already in a bad way, it would be quite easy to do so. "We should meet," finally Emily said, "not a phone call." After a little thought, Alex suggested a cafe near his apartment as the place. He thought it would be safer that way. Less chance of Anjali seeing them and starting to guess something. So they did. When they met, Emily told him more details, seemingly innocent but alarming. To put them into perspective, her stepmother had slowly taken over Damien's business. Emily even suspected she was messing with the paperwork, so that if her father died, Anjali would inherit everything. It would be a good start to get proof of her connection to Adrian. Alex stretched out thoughtfully after listening to the story. "Well, I suppose that can be arranged," the girl smirked. "How's that? I started calling you like a fool when I saw them. You could have made a video." "It's no big deal," Emily brushed it off. "I'll talk to her and record the conversation secretly, saying I saw her with her lover." "Yeah, that's how she confessed to you. You've seen her. She's scandalous. She's bound to talk. You can nail her there. What about her kid? It's actually proof she's cheating. At least it'll make her nervous and probably do something stupid." Alex strongly disliked the idea. He realized that they were dealing with very dangerous people, capable of brutal murder to achieve their goals. But he also realized that there was no way he could talk Emily out of it. He could see her eyes burning. This was far more personal and painful for her than it was for him. "Okay," he said, "but please be careful, and be sure to call me and let me know how it went." Emily left, and all Alex could do was wait for her call. An hour passed. Another, a third. The girl never showed up. He tried to convince himself that everything was fine, that she was going to have a hard and probably long conversation, but the night was already beginning, and his phone was still silent. Alex even wanted to go to her house, but he was afraid that he might ruin everything. He called Emily several times, but she didn't pick up the phone. In the end, the guy decided that the morning would be more obvious. If she didn't show up the next day, then he would have to take action. Alex went to bed. True, he managed to fall asleep only in the morning. He tossed and turned in bed for a long time, haunted by the most horrible thoughts about what could have happened to Emily in the end. He was determined that the next time he saw her, he wouldn't let her go anywhere. Only now he realized how much he really cared about this girl. A few hours later, Alex was awakened by a persistent knock on the door. As he climbed out of bed, he tried to sleepily figure out what was going on. Matthew had already let the uninvited guests in. They were two drenched policemen. Just by looking at their faces, the boy realized that something terrible had happened. "You're under arrest on suspicion of Emily's murder," one of them informed the dazed Alex. "What do you mean?" "In the murder. She's dead," Alex asked, confused. "You better let us know where she is. If not, where can we find her body? Believe me, cooperating with the investigation will count for something," the policeman continued. "I last saw her yesterday," Alex tried to explain. "She went home, going to talk to her stepmother." "So you don't deny the fact of your meeting?" "I don't deny it. But I absolutely did not kill her. God, how can you even be sure she's dead when you haven't even found her body?" "How do you know a body hasn't been found?" one of the policemen asked Riley. "You told me so yourself," Alex muttered, stunned. No. I merely informed you that it was in your best interest to cooperate with law enforcement. No matter how hard Alex tried to explain to the police officers what had really happened, it was all in vain. No one believed his version of Angeli's involvement in the girl's disappearance. After all, she had reported to the police that her stepdaughter had not returned home in the evening. And what a coincidence, right after meeting him. She must have told them a lot of other things. No one told Alex, of course, but they looked at him like a criminal, and he was well aware that the situation was hopeless. All he had was his word against Angeli's. Realizing all this, Alex finally collapsed and without objection allowed himself to be taken to the holding cell. Emily is missing. Damien is in the hospital after suffering a heart attack. There was no one to stand up for him and get out of this situation on his own. The kid didn't stand a chance. Matthew understood his situation. However, unlike Alex, he was still free and could do something. He didn't think for long. He saw Damien's intervention as the only salvation for everyone. As much as not to disturb a sick man, there was nowhere to go. He went straight to the hospital. It took him a long time to explain to the doctors of the prestigious clinic that his case to an important patient could not be delayed. Naturally, no one wanted to let him into the room, until finally Damien Weller himself intervened, who was fed up with the persistent visitor. "Matthew Viktorovich," he muttered in surprise when he saw the entrant. "Is it really you?" "It's been a long time since anyone has called me that," the visitor retorted. "You must have taught at my place." "How so?" "5th through 9th grade. Damien, remember?" "I do, of course. How could I not recognize you? You've come a long way." "I'm the opposite, you see. I've given up. My own kids kicked me out of the house, but that's not why I came to see you." "There'll be time to share the news. Alex is in trouble. Are you Alex's grandfather?" "Yes, I am his grandfather. Even though he calls me that. But then again, that doesn't matter. You listen to me, Damien. I'm just warning you. You're going to have to worry in the course of my story. I didn't want to disturb a man in this state, but there's no other way, and Matthew told his former student the whole story that he knew from Alex's words. How Adrian had contacted Angeli, and how they had plotted to kill Damien, how Alex and Emily had tried to stop them, how the girl had ended up missing and the guy had been taken to the station on suspicion of her murder. "We'll figure it out," Damien replied succinctly. There was no telling how he felt at that moment. Did he believe it? How disturbed was he by his grandfather's story? Matthew watched his face anxiously, but he couldn't tell what effect the story had had. The only thing that was clear to him was that the patient clearly wanted to be alone. Hastily saying goodbye, he left the room. It took the businessman some time to comprehend what he had heard, and then he began to act. The first thing he did was to call a private detective he knew, sending him to follow Angeli. He was sure that if she really had a connection to Adrian, it would come out pretty quickly. After all, now they both must think they had nothing more to fear. In a surprising way, what had happened had worked like medicine on Damien. It seemed like it should be the opposite. But the thought that he was the only one who could figure it all out gave him strength. After a week, the attending physician stated that he could go home. At the same time, the first results of the surveillance appeared. The detective discovered even more than Damien had expected. He managed not only to discover the connection between Angeli and Adrian, but also to record the conversation between the lovers, who, without shyness, discussed their future plans. The conspirators were arrested, and the same day the police had to release Alex with apologies. And soon Angeli began to testify, trying to blame all the blame on her lover. Among other things, she confessed that that fateful night Adrian lured Emily to some cliff above the river allegedly to talk and pushed from there. For all the atrocities committed and planned, the couple was now facing severe punishment. But Damien was not happy about it. He had lost his daughter, his friend, and his wife all at once. His teacher was the only thing keeping him alive, regularly coming to visit and distracting himself from his grief with long conversations about the past. Alex could not accept the idea that Emily was gone. He didn't show up at his apartment or Damien's house. Days and nights, almost without sleep, he searched for the missing girl in the vicinity of the place where the crime was committed. He believed that one day he would find her. One day Alex stumbled upon some hut on the bank of the river, completely abandoned by the look of it, except that there was smoke coming from the stovepipe. Not hoping for anything, he knocked on the door. Maybe the inhabitants of this place had seen something? No one opened the door for a long time. No wonder, for it was unlikely that those who had settled in the middle of nowhere would welcome visitors. But finally the door opened. Alex couldn't believe his eyes. On the threshold stood a guy, apparently about his age. He had the distinct feeling that he was looking in a mirror. The same facial features, the same sharp cheekbones, the same square chin, the same cut and color of his eyes. "It's like a long-lost twin brother. It can't be," Together they exclaimed. The stranger's voice, too, was very similar to Alex's own. The boy was still unable to recover from the new shock that had descended upon him. He was looking for some explanation of what was happening, but he couldn't find it, and as if that were not enough, from somewhere in the depths of the hut, a girl came out limping, leaning against the walls. Her face was disfigured with terrible wounds. However, Alex could not recognize her. Without any doubt, it was Emily. She was not very healthy, but she was definitely alive. She splashed her hands and threw herself into the guy's arms. At that moment, he seemed to lose his senses for a while. At least Alex clearly remembered how he stood in the doorway, looking at his reflection, how Emily appeared and shrieked, rushing to him. And the next memory, he was already lying on something hard, on a bench, as it turned out. The landlord and his guest were bent over him, apparently trying to bring him to his senses. "Don't get up," the lad warned him, "or you may faint again." "Yeah, I think I can do that without getting up," Alex retorted in a hoarse voice, jokingly. "That's good." The stranger turned to Emily. "So he'll live." What's going on here anyway?" "Well, where to start?" the landlord pretended to wonder. "Well, let's put it this way. My name is Nicholas, and by the looks of it, you're my twin brother. Believe me, when Emily mistook me for you, I was just as surprised, but I've had time to get used to it. Besides, I knew you existed before. You've had a rough time of it too, I see, but actually better than me. I was adopted when I was a baby. I had a good family that gave me a great education and gave me a pretty solid start in this life. I even had a business. Only it's all in the past. Apparently I wasn't very careful with my business, found some irregularities, and went to jail." "And what? Released in the end?" Alex asked warily. If only Nicholas brushed it off. "I ran away. My mother is sick, not the one who raised me, our own. That's who I was trying to get to, but I couldn't get in. But I saved a pretty girl, so I'm of some use." "Emily," Alex exclaimed, because she was the one he'd been looking for all this time. And now, from the shock he had experienced, he had completely forgotten that he had found her. She leaned over him and kissed him affectionately on the forehead. He caught her hand, pressed it against his. "What happened?" he asked. "You were right. Until I noticed she didn't bother me talking to this woman, much less. Anyway, at first everything went exactly according to our plan. My plan," she confessed. "I made the tape secretly. She didn't suspect a thing, of course, but I guess at that point she thought I was a danger to her. She woke me up in the middle of the night and told me that she and Adrian wanted to talk to me. 'Since you know everything, maybe we can work something out sometime,' she suggested. I agreed. I thought maybe I could get more evidence, maybe not just of their love affair, but of more serious crimes. I got in the car with her and we drove to this river, but upstream. There are some very steep banks there. Adrian wasn't there, by the way. She said he must be late. She suggested we walk along the bank together for a while, but she also pushed me off the cliff. It must have been the most joyous moment of her life. She hated me so much. I hit very hard, you see, and even had some internal injuries, but somehow I managed to survive. It was very painful. But I knew I couldn't scream. If they realized that I was alive, Adrian would come after all. They looked into the water for a long time, apparently searching for me, but I managed to hide behind some ledge. I found her in the morning," Nicholas added. "She was lying unconscious on the shore. I found her to fish." "Well, thank you," Brother Alex told him sincerely. "I don't know what I'd do if you were really dead." Emily blushed and averted her eyes in embarrassment. Nicholas, on the other hand, grinned in surprise. "Do you know, little brother? You can't get far on one thank you. I think Damien will find something to thank you with." "No, Damien won't help in this case," Nicholas shook his head. "What are you going to do? Go to my mother's instead. Just don't mention the prison or the cabin. Let her think I'm doing fine. Tell her business won't let me come for a while." "Okay," Alex agreed. Then he called Damien and delighted him with the news that his daughter had been found alive and almost healthy. The businessman sent an air ambulance helicopter to pick up the entire company. Emily was immediately sent to the hospital. But Nicholas, convinced that the mother is in good hands, went straight to the police to surrender. Alex fulfilled his promise and a couple of days later went to his mother, whom he had never known. He kept wondering, how would this meeting go for him? How would he feel? Would she be happy that there was a second son? Preoccupied with such thoughts, the guy stood in front of the cherished door for a long time, still hesitating to press the bell. There was no telling how it would end. Maybe he would leave to fulfill his promise some other time. He wasn't quite sure he was ready for this meeting. But then the door opened on its own. On the threshold he saw a woman. She could hardly be called elderly, but a hard life had taken its toll on her appearance. "Nicholas," she exclaimed, "he's here, son. I wish you'd given me a little warning. And I haven't even got anything for tea. I was just going to the store." "Sorry," I said quietly. "I'm not Nicholas. I'm Alex." "Alex," she took a step back, tears welling up in her eyes. The mother stared intently at her second son's facial features, as if trying to find a difference from Nicholas. Finally, waking up, she led him into the apartment and invited him into the kitchen. There was an awkward silence. After a few minutes, Alex still dared to speak. "Nicholas and I met by chance. He told me to tell you that he's very busy, but he'll definitely visit you as soon as he can." His mother was silent. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. She could not bring herself to raise her head and look at her son. A few more minutes passed before she, still keeping her eyes on the floor, finally spoke. "I was young, stupid. When you were born, I wanted some kind of independence from my parents. I got pregnant. I didn't know how to tell my father. He was strict. So I ran away and wandered around. Your daddy didn't want you or me. He sent me away, wouldn't even let me in, said I couldn't prove I had his children, that no one would believe that he could be with someone like me. Where to go, what to do. I didn't know. I was almost a child myself. But I couldn't have another one on top of that, and then it was just a scare. You had two. I didn't know what to do with one. I panicked. I left you at the hospital. I'm sorry, son, even though I don't know. You would have been better off with me." Isabel finally looked up and glanced apprehensively at Alex, but he looked at her and felt unbearable pity for the woman, mixed with tenderness. Could he condemn what she had done? Did he have that right? He got up from the chair where he was sitting. He went to his mother and hugged her tightly. She responded to his embrace and burst into tears. So they sat in silence, interrupted only by occasional sobs. Isabel was the first to speak. "Nicholas found me. He told me he was adopted by rich people, and everything worked out well for him. Retired businessman. You probably know that yourself, but I didn't need 2 kids. So you're out of luck. You could have had either one of the 2. You were just babies back then. Tell me, how did your life turn out?" Alex vividly remembered life in the orphanage. Cruel jokes of his peers, overly strict teachers, strict and rather meaningless daily routine. He remembered how excited he was about graduation day and the fact that he would finally have a place of his own. Yes, a small house somewhere in the middle of nowhere, but it would be his alone. He didn't live in that little house for more than a week. Wooden houses are great, except they burn too well. You mess with the stove, and that's it. Welcome to the streets, to a new homeless life. It's your own fault if you didn't take care of the housing you were given. That's all you get. Then he met Matthew. Grandpa was, of course, strange and firm, clearly in need of care and support. But with his appearance, Alex felt for the first time in his life that he was not alone. And further on, such events began that he could not have imagined, and for all their unusualness, they helped him to find the girl he loved, and now also his brother and mother. "I stayed in the orphanage," Alex answered, "but now I'm doing well too, and I don't blame you for anything. Mom, I'll visit you, just like Nicholas did." They talked about everything for a long time, until finally Alex was going home. He would have stayed longer, but there were things to do in his hometown. He had to visit Emily in the hospital. He had to keep an eye on Matthew. And Damien was asking for some help. Besides, the guy was determined to get to the bottom of his brother's case and get him out of jail if possible. What am I guessing? Guess is not the right word. It's Adrian again. Probably started out with lesser crimes, and then he got a little cocky with his own impunity. It was another 6 months before Alex and Emily finally decided to get married. Of course, their wedding was attended by everyone close to them. Nicholas and his mother, Damien and Matthew. All of them were sincerely happy for the young. But most of all, of course, the newlyweds themselves were happy. Entering a new happy life. Alex did not forget his ward. The apartment where they had been living for the last time was bought by him and completely given to Matthew. And he, feeling the taste of normal life again, thought about returning to his favorite job. Despite his advanced age and some health problems, he remained quite alert and his brain was working as well as ever. Specialists with his knowledge, experience, and love for children are sorely lacking in today's schools. So Matthew quickly became a history and social studies teacher again. That would have been the end of it. But on the same day that Emily and Alex's wedding took place, Caroline, while in the colony, gave birth to a child, a boy, completely healthy. Except his mother didn't need him at all, and she immediately gave him up. This was reported to Damien, who was still considered the likely father of the child, since he was conceived while still married. The latter, without thinking long, made the decision to adopt him and planned to raise the boy as his own son, regardless of who was actually his biological father. It's not the child's fault in any way, he explained to his surprised daughter. But imagine what kind of life would be waiting for him, and even with such a mother. Even though she gave him up, he'd still be stigmatized for life. That's true, Alex confirmed, no stranger to such things. And then a couple months later, Damien learned that he would soon be a happy grandfather. Emily laughingly told him that now she was really pregnant and could even tell her father who it was from without shame. Damien, of course, was only too happy to hear such news. Emily arrived home to find her husband's mistress standing in front of her. And when she held out the document, "What a lovely day today," Emily exclaimed, putting on the table a sumptuous dish of roast duck. "I'm so glad we decided to have lunch with your brother today," Susan said, looking around the table and realizing that everything was in place. She clapped her hands together in satisfaction. A satisfied smile appeared on her face. Her dear, beloved husband, John, came over to her, put his arm around her waist and pulled her close. Emily felt a pleasant warmth on her back, turned around to face him and kissed him on the lips. It had been a full 3 years since they had known each other, and a full 5 months since their wedding day. Emily adored her husband, considered him the closest thing she had to a man. He was well-built, handsome, intelligent, the kind of man one could never find. Emily considered herself lucky. John's hands moved lower, gripping her thighs tighter. "Honey, not now. We have guests coming over," she said, laughing. John was still holding her in his arms, trying to reach her warm neck with his moist, cool lips. Emily kept dodging and laughing, enjoying the sudden game. But then the doorbell rang. Emily opened the door in front of her guests and saw her brother John on the doorstep. "This is Ashley." He introduced his girlfriend. Emily took a quick glance at the attractive woman with slender legs and a bushy mop of black hair. She was petite and fragile. The gray eyes and thin lips on her pale face spoke of a sensitive nature. "Nice to meet you. Come in," she said. Soon John appeared. He greeted the guests, shook his brother's hand, and glanced at Ashley, sizing her up. He kept his emotions to himself. "Let's get to the table," Emily broke the silence. "How did you two meet?" She cut off a piece of duck. The meat was very tender, sent a small piece into her mouth, and then looked up at Ashley, wanting to hear the story of their acquaintance. The girl was a little confused, taking a napkin to wet her lips. Michael beat her to it. Taking a sip of wine, he began to tell the story of their first meeting. "Ashley was giving a seminar at our hospital. A very interesting topic, by the way. He picked up a golden potato with his fork. The effects of drugs on the human body." Emily raised her eyebrows, surprised at the topic his girlfriend had chosen. "Are you a medical professional too?" "I graduated from medical school," Ashley explained, lowering her gaze to her plate. After a second, she glanced at John, who kept his gaze on her. He was sitting diagonally, acting like an observer studying the object that caught his eye. "Did you know?" Emily interrogated her husband. The man, not understanding what she was talking about, interrogated his wife again. It turned out that John had fallen out of the conversation a little, immersed in thought. "Oh my. I did not know that the usual drugs can be real killers. It sounds fantastic." She was genuinely surprised. "Are you planning to get married?" "All you need to know," Michael replied cheerfully. Emily glanced over at Ashley. She replied that they were thinking about it. After a hearty dinner, it was time for hot tea and sweet dessert. "Be careful. There's a risk of swallowing your tongue, because this pie is so good," Emily said as she set a gorgeous strawberry pie with whipped cream on the table. "Did you make it yourself?" Michael wondered. "I got it from the bakery around the corner," she joked. The audience supported her with laughter. "Next week I'm going on a business trip to Germany," John's brother said. He explained that he was being sent on a training course, a long-time dream. There is nothing better than sharing experiences. His brother and his wife supported him. They congratulated Michael on this pleasant news. The dinner came to an end, and the guests, thanking for their hospitality, went home. "But do you think they'll make it?" Emily asked her husband John while putting the dishes in the dishwasher. He replied that they probably would, because they love each other, and you can see it on their faces. Emily finished cleaning up the kitchen, then wrapped her arms around John's neck and pressed herself against him. "I missed you so much," she said, kissing him on the lips. He kissed her back. They snuggled into each other, wrapping each other in an embrace. They walked through the hallway, ending up in a dark room. The deeper they went into it, the more the darkness engulfed them, hiding their silhouettes from view. Deep breathing was heard, the rustle of clothing. Emily was cleaning the house one day, checking the dust and putting things in their places. In the background, the television was playing a program about traveling. Suddenly, it stopped abruptly. There was a breaking news broadcast. The television announced that Flight RU-295 New York-Los Angeles had to make an unscheduled landing in Denver, the newscasters said. Emily knew that Michael was supposed to be on that flight. She immediately called her husband, telling him about it. John replied that he would call his brother back and find out what had happened. But after dialing his number, John heard only short beeps. A little while later, he got a call from Ashley. "Hello, John, hi. Did you call?" "Yes, Ashley, hi. I wanted to know what flight Michael was on." Emily said there was an emergency landing on TV on a flight to Los Angeles. "What? Emergency landing? What was the flight number?" the girl asked. John called out the numbers, and then Ashley breathed a sigh of relief. No. Luckily, Michael has a completely different flight number and he's fine. Don't worry. I just finished talking to him," she replied convincingly. John was in no hurry to end the conversation. "Was there anything else?" Ashley asked. "No, I think it's all clear now," John replied and reluctantly said goodbye. In the evening, he returned home as usual. Emily was waiting for him there. She was happy to see her beloved husband again, asked about his mood, sat down at the table, poured tea into mugs. But suddenly she felt sick. It had happened to her before, and she knew it would pass soon. The thing was that Emily suffered from anemia, which was not well treated. She took daily vitamins to keep her healthy, but it had little effect on her daily life, except now. Only her doctor had warned her that with such a condition, she was unlikely to be able to bear and deliver a child. It made Emily sad, and she often brought it up, fearing that perhaps John wanted children, but with her around, it was unlikely he would ever be able to realize it. "Is everything all right?" John asked, gently holding his wife under her elbow and around her waist. A little more, and Emily stopped feeling dizzy. "We should see another doctor," John suggested. Emily carefully lowered herself onto the cushioned seat. "How long have you been seeing him?" "There's no improvement, and I think it's the opposite," her husband said. "Well, don't say that. Dr. Valerie is a very good specialist," Emily said, and started dinner. John decided not to argue with her, knowing that Emily herself was very careful about her health. After dinner, the couple went to bed. The next day after work, John left the office, headed to his car, walking, trying to find the keys in his pocket as he walked. By chance, he noticed a familiar figure to his right. He stopped his gaze briefly and suddenly saw Ashley standing in front of him. She was leaning over the open hood, obviously trying to find the cause of the malfunction. John couldn't pass by without helping her figure it out. He went over to her and leaned over the hood. "I don't understand what's wrong here," she asked rhetorically, placing her right hand on her hip. She knew someone had approached her, but looked up in surprise and exclaimed, "Ah, John, how timely you are here," he answered, deliberately lingering his gaze on her eyes. "I always show up at the right place at the right time." John then turned his attention back to the car and concluded that the car repairman was needed. Ashley sighed regretfully. "Don't worry, I'll take you where you need to go," John said, easing Ashley's plight. "Oh, I'd appreciate that," she said, tucking a strand of black hair behind her ear. John opened the door to his car and Ashley sat down happily. They drove in almost complete silence, occasionally exchanging a few words. John asked how Michael, who was now in Berlin, was doing. Ashley replied that he was happy to be there, that he was doing well, and that he was glad that he hadn't turned down the offer. "I am very happy for him." I remember Michael always dreamed of being a doctor since he was a kid. And it looks like it's coming true, John concluded, glancing at Ashley. Soon they were in the driveway of the house. Ashley was carrying a heavy bag, and John offered to help her carry it upstairs. She agreed. A few minutes later, they were in a small but cozy apartment. Michael had purchased it a year ago, taking off his high-heeled shoes. Ashley walked to the kitchen and offered John something to drink. Without hearing his response, she pulled out 2 glasses and splashed some whiskey. John was a little discouraged by what was happening, because he wasn't going to stay long. But he couldn't refuse such a beautiful girl either. At that moment, Ashley was wearing a beige dress with black stripes that emphasized her slim figure. She went to the window, opened it, and then took out a cigarette and smoked. John had no idea that she could act so relaxed in company with Michael. She always gave the impression of a nice and proper girl. John stared at her, and at the orange flame that grew stronger with each new puff of Ashley's smoke. There was a fire burning inside John that he didn't want to let go. The girl inhaled the thick stream of smoke eagerly, opening her sensual lips slightly. Her languid gaze made John question his ability to keep his composure. This attractive, delicate girl with white skin, graceful neck, beautiful shoulders, and hips seemed the epitome of defiance. John walked over to the table, picked up his glass, and took a small sip. Ashley offered him a smoke as well. Everything happened in silence, as if they were both enjoying the atmosphere. John took the cigarette from her hands with his index finger and thumb and brought it to his lips. He did something he didn't usually do. He covered his mouth and let the smoke drift away, without taking his eyes off the girl. And John himself didn't notice that he was already kissing her. It was a blur, a fleeting loss of judgment. But what a sweet moment it was, full of feeling and passion. If it hadn't been for the phone call, John would hardly have been able to come to his senses. It was his wife, Emily. She was already waiting for her husband at home and told him that dinner had long since gone cold. "Don't worry, darling, I'll be there soon. I had to stay late for work. I've been so busy, I forgot to call you," John said, looking at Ashley. She lifted the corners of her lips slightly. John found her smile charming, and he smiled back. "I'm on my way." "Kisses," he said, and then he hung up the phone, still looking at Ashley, realizing that he didn't want to break up with her at all. But if he did, he wasn't doing right by his wife. Just before he left the apartment, he stopped for a moment and looked at the girl who had stirred new feelings inside of him today. He knew that he should not continue with what had happened. So with just one last glance at the searing brunette, he walked out the door. When John returned home, his beloved wife met him here. She, as always, met him on the doorstep with a hug and a kiss. "I waited for you. Today you were delayed, not on a joke," she said. She looked tired. John answered her with the usual phrase, and then went into the kitchen, put some food on his plate, and sat down at the table. Emily was telling him about the day before, but John's thoughts were now directed in a completely different direction. He put his fork to his mouth, but he couldn't help but think about Ashley. She seemed so mysterious, so alluring and mysterious. He wanted to keep being around her, to unravel what lurked behind her appearance. He couldn't get rid of the image in front of his eyes, namely her gray eyes, lined with black pencil, her long eyelashes, and her open mouth. "John, are you here?" Emily interrogated him when she didn't get an answer to her question. "Did you ask something?" "As if waking up," said her husband. "What did you do at work today?" Emily asked the question again. John shrugged his shoulders slightly, tilted his head to the left, and began to make up as he went along the flurry of activity he'd supposedly pulled off after hours. Emily stared at him, then yawned, blinking her eyes a few times and wiping away a tear. "I'm so sleepy already," she said. "Go to bed." Then John told her. "I want to wait for you," Emily said, resting her blonde head on his shoulder. At last they went to bed, and Emily complained to her husband again about her dizziness, then fell asleep. John, on the other hand, couldn't sleep for a long time. The next day, when he was at work, Emily called him and told him that she had been taken to the hospital. He jumped out of his chair in surprise. "What happened?" "Are you all right?" he asked. "I don't know. I passed out in the cafe and woke up in the hospital, Emily explained. Honey, I'm on my way right now, John said, and leaving all his work and ordering his secretary to write down everything important, he went straight to the hospital. That day, Emily decided to meet an old friend at a cafe. Everything was fine at first. They were talking nicely, sharing things with each other. But at one point, Emily suddenly felt short of breath. She decided to get up to ask the waiter to turn on the air conditioner. But as soon as she did, her legs gave out and she collapsed to the floor. Her friend rushed to her, and the cafe staff called an ambulance. John paced the hallway in boredom. A nurse ran into him. "Calm down, man," answered him a girl whose low voice did not match her fragile appearance. "Your wife is fine. Ward 5. Come in, please," the nurse said, pointing to the door with her right hand. John literally flew in. Emily was lying there, covered by a sheet. When John saw her, he rushed to her bedside, knelt down, and took her palm in his hands. "Emily, my sweet love, how glad I am that you are well. When you called me, I was so frightened," said the husband, covering his wife's palms with kisses, pressing against her chest, looking into her eyes. "It's all over now. My good man, everything is over," she said, and closed her eyes. Tears came to her eyes. "Why are you crying?" John asked her. "I lost the baby," Emily whispered. She squeezed her eyes shut even tighter, trying to hold back the tears, but she couldn't and burst into tears. "What are you talking about?" John said, not believing his ears. He soothed his wife, stroking her shoulders and back. 5 days later, Emily was discharged home. The doctor recommended regular vitamin intake as well as scheduled IVs to keep her healthy. He also asked for bed rest and no excessive stress on the body. Emily was a little upset about her condition and the fact that she had to lead a sedentary lifestyle. Despite this, she took regular walks in the park and tried to be outdoors more. Sometimes, when John had a free moment, he would join her. Together, they strolled leisurely along the narrow paths, admiring the perfect lawn and the view of the waterfront. Suddenly, John happened to see Ashley on his left. He was very happy to see her, but had to restrain himself in his wife's presence so as not to give himself away. He motioned for Emily to take a seat on the bench. The wife felt devastated. She realized that she needed to draw a resource from somewhere, to take strength to continue living life to the fullest. But the memory of the loss of her child each time brought her down into an abyss of sadness and melancholy. She understood that she had to be in the mood, she had to please her husband, but she just didn't have the strength to do it, and she didn't know where to get it from. Silently, she stared at her feet in her blue shoes, occasionally shifting her blank stare to passers-by. Meanwhile, John glanced discreetly to her left. There, behind a large tree trunk, she could be seen. Ashley was talking to a young man John didn't know. They were talking and laughing about something. And John suddenly felt an incipient jealousy building inside him. Why would he do that? And why would he do that? He has a wife. He loves her. What a man of property. Emily was silent, and John was silent. And he kept glancing over at Ashley. He secretly hoped she'd see him. It had been so long since they'd last seen each other. Then John's thoughts turned to Michael. How's he doing? I'd have to ask Ashley about that, he thought. Who's that? Ashley, Emily suddenly asked him. John pretended as if he didn't understand where she'd seen her or who she was talking about. It's not Ashley. You must be imagining it, John said for some reason. But Emily persisted and soon called Ashley's name. She turned around and waved at them with a big smile. Come here, Emily shouted to her. John, whose memory of kissing her was still fresh in his mind, got a little nervous, froze on the bench, and began to adjust his shirt. Ashley stepped closer to them, and Emily greeted her. Strangely enough, she acted perfectly calm, as if there was nothing between her and John at all. The man even thought for a moment that he might have been taking something too seriously that wasn't really worth worrying about at all. How are you doing? Tell me, how's Michael? Emily asked. Ashley was eager to talk about what was going on, about her life. You know, Michael is doing well. He's learning. He's getting new knowledge. He likes everything. He promised to send me a picture, but he can't send it. He says he has no time, she said through laughter. Well done, boy." "It's always been his dream," said Emily. "I'm happy for him," too, Ashley said. Then she turned her gaze to John and looked him straight in the eye. He felt like she was seducing him right now with her pretty face. He felt his cheeks begin to burn, and he glanced furtively at Emily's wife. He tried to see if she suspected anything, but all his fears were in vain. Emily had her full attention on Ashley, who was a breath of fresh air to her. Yes, she lacked female companionship, and she needed the support of a woman. She even suggested to Ashley that they get together sometime to sit in a cafe. She said she'd be glad to, but she'd have to pick a free day. They talked for a while, and then Ashley said she had to go. John and Emily headed home as well. Evening had fallen. A cool air was descending on the town. It was pleasantly soothing and drowsy, making them want to go home and crawl under the warm blankets. That night, John couldn't sleep again. Thoughts of this girl, who was much braver than he had thought, would not leave him. The next day, when his workday was over and he was heading to his car, he heard a familiar hello. John stopped, looked in the direction the voice had come from, and was pleasantly surprised. But it really was Ashley in front of him. She was standing, leaning against her car. She was, as she always was, in a frilly pantsuit, slacks, and a blazer with a low-cut tank top underneath. She looked stylish and eye-catching. John looked around to make sure no one could see him. Then he slowly approached the girl, stood in front of her, and looked at her sharp chin, which she lifted up at that moment, presenting her thin, smooth neck to him. John was ready to put his lips to her soft skin right now, but he held himself back on purpose, realizing that it wasn't the right thing to do. "Should I give you a ride?" she asked, knowing the answer in advance. "I'd be willing to go to the end of the world with a nice driver," John answered her. The scent of her perfume reached his nostrils, and he reached for it. He almost touched her cheek, but Ashley dodged him. "Jump in the car, baby," she said rather defiantly. It made her future traveling companion even more excited. John was fully aware that his beloved wife was waiting for him at home, but he was drawn to this woman like a magnet. He literally couldn't help himself. She was truly full of life, full of passion and feelings that make us live and feel that we are alive. John didn't want to think about anything else that day. He wanted to savor the moment. He and Ashley went to the waterfront, where they spent a pleasant evening. The weather was surprisingly warm. It was wonderful to be outdoors. Ashley was having fun, laughing. Her laughter sounded so resonant, and it made John feel different from Emily, who had been feeling more and more depressed and sad lately. She took off her shoes and began to stroll down to the shore, each time gracefully drawing a line with her foot. John walked a little farther along, admiring her dance steps. Then she threw off her jacket, exposing her beautiful shoulders, and began to move them so sweetly and tantalizingly, as if she were deliberately teasing John. Finally, their walk ended, and they both ended up at the apartment where she lived with Michael. As soon as they entered, John pounced on Ashley and pinned her against the wall, running his fingers down her neck, traveling lower. Ashley waited for him to make the first move. The feelings overwhelmed them both. Trying to stop was futile. There seemed to be nothing better than the present moment. John was happy to drown in this passion, in these emotions, to inhale the scent of her skin, her hair, to touch her body and feel himself the happiest man in the world. After this encounter, filled with madness, John could no longer live as before. He began to look at his once beloved wife in a completely different way. She made breakfast and put it on the table. Emily refused to eat breakfast, citing a lack of appetite and a headache. If John had known how to help her, he would have done so. But the only thing he could do was to get his wife to see another doctor, who would get her back on her feet in no time, and they would forget about the constant apathy and lack of energy. That afternoon, John ate breakfast alone. Emily poured tea into a mug and went to her room. Her husband ate breakfast alone, but strangely enough, that's what he wanted now, to be alone with the memories of the woman who had colored his last night. After breakfast, John asked if Emily needed anything. "No, dear, thank you. I have everything." "You don't have to worry," she replied as she turned another page of the book she had spent most of her life in. The next time John met with Ashley, he unwittingly told her about what was going on in his family. She caught his pensive look, and asked what was wrong. John replied that he was concerned about his wife's condition. "Yes, I've noticed too that Emily is a bit immersed in herself. Is something troubling her?" Ashley asked so thoughtfully. Her voice was calm and gentle, and John decided to tell her everything. Ashley listened to him carefully and then said, "Yes, it's hard to live with a depressed person. Not only does he himself not know how to deal with it, he also surrounds his loved ones with the same mood." John said he himself began to feel a lack of desire to do anything. "I used to always be in a good mood, going to work, trying to do something for the family, to earn more, to fulfill the plan, or to get home faster. But now it's like I'm losing the point of it. I feel like Emily and I have become very distant from each other. So what? She's not interested in me anymore. I feel like I can't help her. The only thing I can do is find a good doctor to get her out of this state of perpetual apathy and depression." Ashley was smoking a cigarette at this time. John was sitting on the edge of the bed, his legs covered by the blanket. Ashley lowered herself to the floor and held out the cigarette to him. Emily took a deep drag on the cigarette. You could hear the tobacco crackling as it burned. "You know, I have a good doctor," Ashley said in a confident voice. "He pulled my best friend out of a similar condition once. He knows what he's talking about." Her confident tone cheered John up a little. He even felt a little relieved at the thought of being able to help Emily. "I'll talk to him, and then I'll let you know when you and Emily can come see him," the brunette said, and took another drag on her cigarette. John looked at Ashley and envied his brother a little, because he had gotten the girl. When the husband got home, he talked to his wife about the new doctor. "He's been praised and recommended," he said. Emily sat on a kitchen chair. John stood behind her, telling her about the doctor and the treatment that was sure to help her. He massaged her neck and shoulders with his large, warm hands. After some thought, Emily agreed. She too wanted to return to a full life and improve her health. At the doctor's appointment, the middle-aged man asked a few questions. "Tell me, how long have you been having negative thoughts?" he asked. Emily sat in the chair, looking around the walls of the office, her gaze resting on a shelf of books. The office was spacious and bright. On William's doctor's desk were a row of elephant figurines, all with their trunks up. Emily counted 9 elephants, all of them different. "Why elephants?" Emily asked instead of answering. That confused the doctor a little. "Well, elephants bring happiness," was the first thing that came to his mind. After a moment's hesitation, he said, "Let us return to the subject of our conversation. I need to understand your condition so that I can give you the right treatment." Emily exhaled and began to tell him about the first signs of her ailment. The doctor listened attentively, making notes in his notebook. Emily watched him as she continued her story. William finally drew some conclusions for himself and then invited John into his office. He explained to both of them what tests needed to be taken. Emily felt overwhelmed. When she and her husband stepped out into the hallway, she turned to him. "Honey, I don't think we should do this. My doctor is doing fine. He knows me well." She was used to her doctor and didn't want to work with a new person. But her husband insisted, saying it would be for her own good. After some hesitation, she agreed. John put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close to him. She smiled back at him and reached up to kiss him. John was very glad that they did see a doctor and his wife agreed to be treated by another specialist. When the test results came back, John visited the doctor's office again, and the doctor gave him the medication that Emily was to take on a specific schedule. "Tell me, when can we expect to see improvement?" John asked. The doctor answered ambiguously and vaguely, saying that every body was different, and it would take time to know how fast the healing process would take place. John shook the doctor's hand, thanking him, and walked out the door. Emily greeted him with a smile. When he got home, she stood wrapped in blankets. She had spent the whole day in bed. "You can put the kettle on and sit down at the table. I ordered your favorite sushi," your husband said in an upbeat mood. "Oh, by the way, I went to the doctor today. He handed over your medication." Emily walked lazily into the kitchen. She had a bit of a headache. "Of course, since you've been in bed all day. Tomorrow your new treatment will begin. I'm sure it'll work out this time, honey." John said as he came out of the bathroom. Emily tried to stay in a good mood, even though she had been experiencing a lingering dull ache in her abdomen since morning. She decided not to tell her husband about it, so that she wouldn't upset him and start whining about her aches and pains. She sat down at the table. Soft, voluminous blanket enveloped the girl like a dense foam. She looked very cute in that outfit. Open-shouldered outfits suited her perfectly. Oh my gosh. Emily used to be cheerful, joyful, always full of life. John remembered the first time they'd met, when Emily had looked so confused, so defenseless, and that made her even more attractive. But now, when John looked at his wife, he didn't recognize her at all. The once cheerful person had turned into a creature with sad eyes that was impossible to look at without pity. John picked up one roll with his chopsticks and held it out to Emily. She laughed, but ate it. Their modest family dinner passed in silence, and then they went to bed. John thought about Ashley. It would be nice to meet her. How is she doing now? Michael should be here soon. Something's holding her up. Maybe it's for the best. John looked at his wife. She was lying on her back with her head turned to the left, sleeping soundly. John ran his hand over her shoulder, then turned to his right side and fell asleep. It wasn't long after Emily had started her new treatment. But strangely enough, she only got worse. She reported it to her husband. He was upset. They put his wife in the hospital. I'm so worried that something might happen to her, John said when he met up with Ashley again. He was standing by the window. Ashley stepped closer, ran her palm along the line of his jacket, shook off the non-existent dust, and stared directly at his lips. Understand, you're doing everything you can to help your wife. It's not like you can jump over your head. No one can. It's impossible, she said in a gentle, clear voice. So stop torturing yourself in vain and let yourself rest after all. She looked into John's eyes, and he believed her, pressed his lips to hers, felt the tenderness of her lips, and sank as if in weightlessness. Ashley pulled off his jacket and slowly began to undo the buttons of his shirt. You need to relax, trust me, she whispered. It seemed to John that Ashley was right, and there was nothing wrong with him spending another night with her. After all, Ashley had helped him, supported him through everything, even found his wife's doctor. And John liked her as a woman. He couldn't stop her embrace, and he didn't want to. He wrapped his arms around her thighs, squeezed them tightly. Soon he didn't notice how he fell in love with this girl. He kept thinking about his brother, who was still abroad and didn't seem to be in any hurry to return. But John was only too glad for that. As long as Michael was in Germany, he could still go out with Ashley. One morning the man was getting ready for work. He was already running a little late, hurriedly tying his tie as he went. He'd had a little coffee, almost burned himself. Lately he'd been making his own breakfast, since Emily was still in bed indulging in sleep. John entered the room to say goodbye to her before leaving for work. But when he entered, he found his wife lying on the bed. Her right arm was down on the floor. She was lying in a rather unfamiliar position. Suddenly, John was overcome with panic. He was afraid that perhaps Emily wasn't well. And he was right. He ran over to her and checked her pulse first, slapping her cheeks, trying to bring her to her senses. John's whole body shook with fear. He rushed to the phone and dialed Ashley's number. Stop being hysterical, she said in a voice that had a distinctly steely edge to it. If she has a pulse, she's alive. I'll call an ambulance to take her back to the hospital. Calm down, I'm coming to you, she said, and then hung up. Ashley's eyes flashed with an evil light. She arrived at John's house very quickly indeed. The ambulance arrived at the same time. Emily was placed on a stretcher and taken to the hospital. Ashley walked over to John and looked into his eyes. You don't have to be afraid of anything. It's going to be okay, she said so insistently and so confidently, wrapping her arms around John's face. There was fear in his eyes. The doctors are doing everything they can. I love you, the brunette added so suddenly that John didn't even know what to say to her. He was grateful to this girl for being there for him and helping him in every way possible. His breathing became more rapid. He was also staring into Ashley's gray eyes, which were literally penetrating him. I love you, too, he said. Ashley's expression became emotional. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her lips stretched into a smile, and her whole face lit up with a strange light, completely baffling John. It was as if he didn't realize what he'd just said, or how his words had affected Ashley. She nestled her lips against his again. She did it as if they were the only two people in the world. "Let's go to the hospital and check in, and then we'll go to my place," she said. John agreed with her. They arrived at the hospital and asked the doctor about Emily's condition. They received a disappointing answer. William George said that Emily's illness had taken on a new form, and her condition had become more complicated. John wrapped his arms around his head. He didn't want to believe what the doctor was telling him. He was depressed. Words could not describe how he felt right now. John got up from his seat, walked out into the hallway, and began to walk from side to side, biting his fist. He did not want to accept the current state of affairs, because the treatment proposed by the doctor was supposed to improve his wife's condition. But in the end, the opposite had happened. And John felt guilty. He had insisted that Emily try the new treatment. Maybe he should have left things as they were, and none of this would be happening now. He berated himself for the mistake he'd made. His head throbbed as if someone inside it was trying to push the walls apart, pushing them harder and harder time after time. But Ashley came out into the hallway, joining him, wanting to hug him, but he wasn't ready for that right now. "I understand how you feel, but we don't have to give up," she said. Her words only made John feel worse. Ashley told him that the best thing to do now was to go home and get a good night's sleep. "There's not much you can do for your wife in your condition," Ashley pointed out. John listened to her again, and they drove to her house. "I neglected her. I betrayed her," the man said, sinking into guilt. "I shouldn't have done it. There's nothing I can do now. What a fool I am. What an idiot. She really loves me. She's faithful to me, and I left her in this state," John said, sitting back in his chair. The top two buttons of his dark blue shirt were undone. He was rubbing his chin and cheeks, which were covered with fine stubble. "What about me?" Ashley asked suddenly. "Don't my feelings for you count? My sincere love for you? Do you think that's just a bunch of empty words? How am I supposed to live with that?" She sank to the floor in front of him. John distracted himself from his self-destructive thoughts and looked at her. "You haven't thought about me at all, because I love you too. What am I supposed to do about it?" she asked him, her gaze demanding. Then she grabbed his hands and began to cover them with small kisses. "Are you going to leave me now? Will you leave me? Forget me?" Ashley asked jokingly, looking into his eyes. Ashley's eyes were desperate and bewildered. John took her hands in his. "Wait, that's not what I was going to say at all," he said, fearing to see the distress on Ashley's face. "But that's exactly what you're saying. You're saying you love your wife and regret getting involved with me. You're willing to abandon me when I need your support the most. God, how am I supposed to get through this?" Having said that, Ashley tried to go upstairs, but John held her back. "What are you talking about?" he interjected. His emotions went from self-recrimination to Ashley's depressed state. "Michael," she said barely audibly, putting a hand to her lips. "What's wrong with him?" John interjected with a frown. "I was going to tell you later, but what does it matter now? I got a call from the emergency services yesterday that Michael was missing," she said, turning toward the window. John lit a cigarette, probably trying to calm himself down. He too rose from his chair and hesitantly wanted to approach her, but stopped halfway. "Wait, but how did this happen? I mean, you said he was fine, and you talked on the phone regularly." He looked at her slender figure, clad in the black lace cardigan that suited her so well. "Yes, that's right. We've talked often, but there's been no messages from him in the last few days. I got worried, but I had no contacts to find out what was wrong with him. So I called the search service, through their channels. They found out that a certain Michael Alexandrovich had disappeared without a trace. That sounds strange. Where could he have disappeared to?" John asked. Ashley, standing with her back to him and looking at her reflection in the window, took a deep drag on her cigarette smoke. "It's awful," she said in a shaky voice ready to turn to crying. John came over and put his arm around her. "But why didn't you tell me about it right away? The more time passes, the harder it is to find a person who waited for a response." Ashley took her time answering. She smoked quietly, put out her cigarette, then turned to John. I had too much on my plate at one point. I wasn't just thinking about myself, I was thinking about how to help his wife. I tried to handle it on my own, especially since you have your own worries. Your wife needs help, too. You didn't immediately hire a good doctor for her, did you? Her voice took on a steely tone. It slightly confused and stunned John. He didn't understand what Ashley was getting at. You know, I've been doing everything I can to make my wife better. But God knows, things took a different turn. John began to make excuses. Ashley decided to stop talking this time. Walking over to him, she put her arms around him. "You're all I have left," she said. John was overcome with guilt again. He realized that he had no right to leave Ashley alone right now. They spent that night together, comforting each other. The next day, after waiting for John to leave for work, Ashley went to run some errands. Before going out, she took a bath and picked out her clothes. She put on a beige suit, which looked stylish and not too revealing, and completed the look with earrings, a chain, and her favorite perfume. After assessing her reflection in the mirror, she left the apartment. Ashley knew exactly where she was going. Her cab stopped outside the hospital. She walked confidently toward the main entrance. Ashley didn't come here to see Emily. Almost at the end of the hallway, she turned right and opened a door with a sign that read Chief Medical Officer William George. "Oh, you, my dear. It's good to see you," he said, rising from his chair. It seemed he and Ashley had been acquainted for a long time and knew each other quite well. They exchanged welcoming kisses. "You look lovely," as always, the doctor commented on his guest's appearance. "I came to tell you that it's time for us to speed up the process. Don't you think so?" she asked the doctor. He spat in his chair, put his foot on his leg, and put his hands on the armrests. Definitely felt like a king. "Yeah, what do you suggest?" William George said playfully, taking out 2 small glasses and a bottle of white wine from the minibar. He poured just a little into the glasses and held one out to Ashley. "Let's at least drink to our meeting. It's so rare to see you anymore. I miss these moments," he said. Ashley looked at him and took a deep breath without answering. She remembered how he'd picked her up on the street when she was very young, given her shelter and food. Never tried to keep her close to him, but Ashley realized herself that she needed to stay close to him now. And only when she felt her own strength, expressed her desire to live independently and separately from him, she rented her own apartment and began to live again. Except she didn't know how to live any other way. Thanks to William George, she learned to seduce men, to fall in love with them, and then, having obtained the desired result, to part with them coldly and ruthlessly. The worst of it was that this man could give her everything but true love. Ashley, who had lived with him for 4 years, could not get rid of her consumerist attitude toward men. And now that she was on her own, she'd met them time after time and used them. They were all different, each good in his own way, young, interesting, promising, just the kind of men this girl needed. She got to know them, fell in love with them, took what interested her, and then parted. This went on countless times, and there was no way this girl could stop. She did not know how to live differently, because she knew how to behave with the opposite sex only like this. Unfortunately, she was too uptight and closed to be real to them, and so she was only able to communicate with them superficially for her own benefit. Ashley was far from stupid and had caught herself thinking that more than once. But she was unable to change her behavior. It was more difficult than she had imagined. But despite this, there was always one person in her life to whom she could return at any moment, from whom she could ask for help, and who could take pity on her. That was William George, and this time she had come to ask for his help again. She needed to speed things up, for she could not wait long enough to avoid arousing unnecessary suspicion. "I need your help again," Ashley said, clutching the thin-stemmed glass in her hand. "What are you talking about?" The doctor asked her again. "You know what I mean," she replied. "You must remember that I am always ready to help you, because you are like a daughter to me," he said. He walked around the table, sat down on the countertop, and then, facing Ashley at a very close distance, allowed himself to cup her chin. This man loved to feel power over others, and especially this girl. William reached forward, wanting to touch her lips. "Give me what I ask of you first," Ashley replied, pulling his hand away. He looked at her for a moment, then stood up, walked over to the safe, opened it with a small key, and took out a tiny bottle. "Here you go, and don't forget your precautions," he said, sitting down on the edge of the table again and folding his hands on his knee. It was like he was waiting for Ashley to go a little softer on him, but she kept her distance. And they both felt it. When Ashley got home that evening, John was already here, having made them both a light dinner, and was glad to have Ashley to keep him company. She asked how his day at work had gone. John replied that things were holding steady. When both of them had satisfied their hunger, they were still in the kitchen talking about their various chores. "I brought some medicine. You should give it to Emily," she mumbled, immediately handing John a small vial. "What is it?" he asked. "Believe me, the glass contains something that will help your wife," Ashley said. "Where did you get it?" he asked again. "Money. It's not that important anymore. What's important is that we have something we can do for your wife," she said, not wanting to go into details. Ashley's words always had a surprising effect on John. Maybe it was the effect of falling in love. The day John had come to visit Emily, he'd done everything Ashley had told him to do. He piously believed that Ashley wished nothing but the best for him and his family. Pouring water into a glass, he opened the vial and poured its contents into the water. Emily's appearance left a lot to be desired. She was pale, her cheeks sunken. When she saw John, she tried to smile. Her lips were pale, chapped. "Emily, you need to drink this," John said. "The doctor said it would help you keep your body strong." "Thank you for your concern," she said in a weak voice. Her husband helped her up so she could take the medicine. Emily emptied the glass and looked into her husband's eyes again. She was sorry he had to see her in this condition. "Don't worry, I'll get better soon, and everything will be fine," she said. John ran his palm over her cheek. He was looking at his wife as if she were a different person now. "You're going to be all right," he said. Even though he said so, he could hardly believe it. For too long the doctors had been trying to cure her. But all their efforts were in vain. The disease had no intention of leaving its new home. Yes, John had lied. But what else could he tell her in this situation? A few days later, Emily got worse. The doctors were very tight-lipped, and one day they informed John that they had to transfer Emily to a hospice unit. He was shocked by the news. As always, Ashley was by his side, putting her hand on his shoulder. Both of them returned home. John was heartbroken. He didn't want his wife to end her life by passing away in the prime of life from some unknown disease. Ashley found something to say to him again. She talked and told him not to blame himself for anything, that he shouldn't forget about himself and his life as it was. "You are young, you are handsome, you are full of vigor. You can't put an end to your life," she said. John sat on the couch, putting his elbows on his knees and covering his face with his palms. "You don't have to put your hands down. You're not alone. You know you have me," she said, spreading his arms. Ashley climbed into his lap, wrapped her arms around his face, and looked into his eyes. "You don't have to give up. Do you hear me? And I'll always be there for you," she said, and then nestled her lips against his. How did she do it? It remains a mystery. But as time went on, Emily stayed in the hospice. There she received the care she needed, no longer hoping for her recovery. Meanwhile, Ashley moved in with John. She was already feeling like a full-fledged mistress and was thinking about what kind of renovations she wanted to make to her room and telling John what kind of kitchen she wanted to replace her old one. He saw Ashley's happy eyes, and it seemed to him that this was the way it should be. Soon she started talking about getting married. More and more changes were happening in John's life. He couldn't figure out if he was going in the right direction. Ashley, on the other hand, was persistent. Unlike him, she knew exactly what she wanted. Once, while John was watching TV on the couch, she sat next to him and stroked his hands. John responded by stroking her hands. Finally, when Ashley had his attention, she said, looking at the ring finger of her hand, "How nice an engagement ring would look here. Don't you think so?" she asked, looking at John. "Yes, any jewelry would look lovely on your beautiful, delicate hands," John pointed out. "No, you don't understand. I want a wedding band," Ashley said flatly. Are you serious? John clarified. What do you think? You and I have been living together under the same roof for so long, and you still wonder if we're serious about each other? Ashley asked him. Well, yeah, I agree with you, you're right. But how can we get married when my wife thinks I'm still in love with her? John suddenly objected. Ashley looked at him reproachfully. How can you say that? Look, you're not only hurting your feelings right now, you're hurting mine too. I'm living with you. I'm hoping for something, making plans, dreaming about our children. Life goes on. I'm not getting any younger. Are you ready to wait and stall for time? You've upset me too. I didn't expect this from you, Ashley said. I was sure that you really loved me and that you were ready to start a family with me. But then all of our meetings and hugs and kisses weren't real. Was it? At that question, Ashley jumped to her feet and looked at John as if he'd just betrayed her. I guess you're saying that you never loved me, and everything that happened between us was just a lie, a pathetic game you made up. Tell me the truth. Ashley screamed. Are you really crazy? No, not at all, John said, trying to even things out. Why would you think that? Calm down, please. I'm not with you for a game, believe me, really. I really like you. I have feelings for you. And of course, I'd like to marry you. Oh, for God's sake. Marry me. John suddenly said, getting down on one knee and taking out the ring he wanted to give her for her birthday. I'm sorry I wanted to do this a little later, but I'm very happy that you're going to be my wife. I really am, he said, and in that moment he was probably sincere. After all, he wasn't going to hurt Ashley and he was ready to take her as his wife. Oh my God, John, this is so sudden, she suddenly exclaimed, delighted. She put her hands to her mouth like a child as if she were afraid to frighten away the sudden happiness. What joy. I'm so happy. At last we will be able to legalize our relationship and not hide, she said. Soon they signed and celebrated this festive celebration in a cafe with friends. Ashley was glowing with happiness. The guests congratulated the newlyweds. John felt a little awkward, but still, hearing the approving congratulations of the guests, was happy about it. John, you're doing great. Congratulations. How is Emily? One of his friends asked him. He replied that everything was the same with her. The groom tried to avoid these questions. After the celebration, family life settled down to a moderate pace. John was still working, visiting Emily in hospice on his free days. She rarely spoke to him and slept more and more. John, when visiting her, could not tell her that he had remarried. Before entering the room, he took off his wedding ring, which was wide and different from the ring Emily had once put on his finger. To be honest, John sighed with relief when he saw Emily asleep. In front of her, he felt a kind of shame for what he'd done. But now he was back home. Today was a day off, and Ashley was looking forward to seeing John. She had a surprise for him, and when he sat down at the table, she pulled out a small box. John looked at everything going on with interest in his eyes. Well, don't you want to open it? She uttered, looking intently into his eyes. He smiled and replied that of course he wanted to. He took off the top pink cardboard lid and saw a beige napkin inside, on which was a soft bear cub the size of a small ball, and next to it a smooth paper strip. What is it? John wondered. He grinned and looked at Ashley again. You and I are having a baby, she said, and stepped a little closer to John, taking his hands in hers and placing them on his lower abdomen. Can you feel that our baby is here? She bared her white teeth. John could hardly believe it. But it was true, and he would soon be a father. God, this was what he had dreamed of for so long. With Emily, they'd tried to have kids, but it hadn't worked out. But with Ashley, it was different. He was about to become a father. Ashley walked down the hallway past John's office. It was a small cubbyhole where he used to crawl in alone, thinking about something or talking on the phone. The door was ajar, and Ashley saw him. He was sitting at the table. He had a rather pensive look on his face. His eyes were staring straight ahead. John was definitely not here right now. He held a glass of whiskey in his left hand, squeezed the right corner of his mouth, then emptied the glass. John was distracted from his heavy musings by Ashley, who had just entered the office. Catching her husband's gaze, she smiled. He pulled a smile onto his face as well. He didn't want her to see him sad for anyone. And he had someone to be sad about. He thought of Emily, of leaving her, of stopping fighting with her. And it made him feel hard. "Honey, could you give me a few minutes?" Ashley spoke. She was holding some paperwork. "I had a checkup at the doctor's office. We want the baby to be born healthy, right?" She fixed John's hair. "Of course, my love," her husband answered her, closing his eyes. "You know, I put your name as my proxy. Sign here, please." She whispered in a soft voice. John, without a second thought, took the pen and, without reading anything, signed his name in the lower right-hand corner. "Thank you, my good man." Ashley leaned over to kiss him. "Are you going to bed, or are you going to stay here a while?" she asked, tucking the papers behind her back. He replied that he would stay a little longer and he would join her in bed. "I'm waiting for you," the mother to be added, and left for her room. Ashley put the papers in her bag, then undressed and lay in bed. Her eyes were open. She wasn't going to sleep. She waited for John to come in, but he was in no hurry. He poured the whiskey again, emptied the glass again. He was not feeling well, to say the least. It would seem a happy new wife, a child in the future. But no peace of mind. And he knew it very well himself. He thought about his ex-wife and how she had stopped recognizing him. She'd gotten really bad. John tried to think about the present, about what he had now, but his thoughts kept coming back to Emily. While he was enjoying his new family life, she was slowly fading away, day by day. The next morning, a young doctor entered Emily's room. He was taller than average, had blonde hair and an equally blonde, close-cropped beard. He had started working at the hospice only a week ago. Before that, he had worked in a neighboring town in a polyclinic. However, writing his doctoral thesis forced him to transfer to the hospice for necessary observations. This young doctor naturally had an inquisitive mind. Moreover, he was very quick and qualitative in this direction, from which he was quickly liked by the entire medical staff. The doctor carefully examined the patient, wrote something down in his notebook. His eyes were focused. He glanced again at the patient, whose face had a horrible hue. Vaguely, he recalled how they were taught what to do in cases like this. A line below it, he wrote down the tests he intended to take from this woman. I was about to leave when suddenly I heard a very soft voice. "Wait, stay with me for a while." Emily did not open her eyes, but she knew that someone was with her. She was already so weak that at times consciousness came back to her, and a great sadness and pain came over her at being here. It had been a very long time since she had seen John, but she didn't blame him for that. She realized that there was nothing he could do about her being so sick. It was only the sadness of that realization that filled her soul. "I'm here," the doctor answered. Emily struggled to open her eyes. It seemed to be the first time she had seen this face. "What is your name?" she asked. "My name is Michael George." "Michael to you," he said. "I'll need to run some new tests on you to see what's going on." "Go ahead, doctor, I don't care anymore." "I already know there's only one end," she said with difficulty. The doctor did not answer her. He understood that her condition was grave, but something was definitely confusing him. And the practice he had under his belt told him that this woman might have been misdiagnosed. But when he took all the necessary biomaterials and analyzed them, his hunch was confirmed, and he immediately started the treatment according to the new scheme. And one day when he came to visit Emily, she was already waiting for him. She was still lying in bed, unable to get up. Even so, her mind was clearer. "Good morning," she greeted the doctor. He answered her in the same way. His lips turned up in a smile. "You're in a good mood, I see," he asked as he came closer. As he had all the previous days, the doctor checked her pulse and blood pressure, felt her lymph nodes, and drew blood. Emily held his gaze. "How do I know?" "Your face is very familiar to me," she said suddenly. Michael looked intently into her eyes. "Yes, that's right. I've definitely seen you somewhere before," she said, "but I can't remember where." The long stay in oblivion had weakened her memory a little. "Unfortunately, I can't help you with that. Maybe when you're feeling a little better, you can solve this riddle," Michael replied casually. Suddenly the phrase, You're asking the riddle came to Emily's mind. It had been uttered then by the blonde-haired guy in the family circle. Emily's brain went through one picture after another. Things were getting a little confusing. She tried to focus. There were young people in front of her eyes, a blonde, a brunette, and some other man. That's right. There was her husband, John, and that young Dr. Michael. But how did he end up there with them? Tell me, do you have any family? Maybe brothers or sisters? I remember something, but I'm not sure, Emily said. Really? What is it? Michael grinned. Emily strained again to try to recreate the picture better. But alas. I have to admit, I'm the one who had the misfortune to lose his memory, Michael said. That left Emily stunned. What do you mean, lost your memory? She questioned. Michael wanted to tell her, but at that moment a nurse entered the room and called out to him. We'll talk about this later, okay? Michael said, distracted. Yes, of course, Emily said, smiling at him. The nurse who had called Michael looked at Emily strangely and closed the door without saying anything. The nurse told Michael to go to the head doctor's office. Michael knocked on the office, and after answering, he entered. Have a seat, Michael, said the chief physician. His name was Ben Anderson. Yesterday I wanted to ask about a patient named Emily Johnson. He looked at the doctor carefully. I must say, you've made great strides. And as cynical as it sounds, I'm glad you lost your memory once Ben laughed and prepared to listen to Michael's answer. Yes, sometimes we don't know where fate will take us, he answered. But what I'm wondering is, under what circumstances did this woman come to our hospice? Didn't the other doctors find the real cause of her illness? The strange thing is that the mobility of red blood cells, which had been reduced, became normal again, and the shape began to return to its original form. You, Ben, as a specialist with vast experience, you know that this occurs only in two cases. The first we immediately dismiss, and then we're left with the well-known clotting agent. But I don't understand your thinking, Ben Anderson interrupted him. Where are you going with this? Michael was in no hurry to answer. Something told him it was too early to say it out loud. Michael carefully monitored Emily and visited her every day. Despite the serious condition from which she had recovered and stabilized, she was still a person who loved life and had a kind heart toward people. Tell me, why doesn't anyone visit you? He once asked. When he said it, Michael regretted it. His words might have hurt her. She thought for a moment and replied that she didn't know why. I guess it's too hard for my husband to see me like this. Frankly, I've lost track of time. I can't tell you the last time he was here. Maybe a week ago, maybe a month. But I don't blame him. John was with me every day before I got here. He did everything he could to help me. I'm grateful for that. After all, if I hadn't gotten here, I wouldn't have met you, and my recovery wouldn't have begun. And yet your face looks familiar to me, she repeated, scrutinizing Michael. He squinted, as if trying to see something that had come to him. As you said, your husband's name is John? He asked, and seemed to sink further into the past, recognizing himself anew. She nodded, adding that John had a brother. After saying the last word, Emily fell silent. Finally, they looked into each other's faces. It seemed as if something important was about to be revealed, but the door to the room opened again, and Michael was urgently invited into the next room. Emily was left with the persistent feeling that she knew this man for sure and had seen him before. Eventually, she came to the conclusion that this young doctor just looked a lot like Michael, her husband's brother. Same blonde hair, and even his facial expressions were similar, but something was still different. And so far, Emily couldn't figure out exactly what it was that made her think that. On one hand, she seemed to be socializing with Michael, but on the other hand, looking at his face, he was very different from the Michael she had once known. Time went by and Emily was getting better and better each day. Emily could feel new strength literally being added to her. She could feel the blood in her veins developing throughout her body and filling it with warmth. She felt again that she could start doing something next time. When Michael came to see her, she asked him if he could purchase some thread and a hook for her. She had wanted to crochet a backpack for herself for a long time, but had put it off every time. Now she felt that she could crochet it in just a couple of days, and she wanted to make it happen. Look, you're almost completely healthy, her doctor said, and it was true. She had even been moved to another ward because she no longer fit the parameters of a hopelessly ill person. "Don't you want to call your husband? After all, you are no longer without strength. You can talk to him about something," Michael suggested to her. But when he saw Emily's saddened look, he realized that it wasn't that simple. "I called him, but his phone was always out of range. I don't know what to think. Maybe he left town altogether," Emily said, a little confused. "Yeah, that's a little strange. How could a loving husband leave his wife in the hospital and not even be interested in her condition?" Michael asked the question aloud and regretted it again. He realized that this topic would hurt his ward. "Are you married?" Emily asked him in response. She again stumped him because the doctor could not remember the details of his personal life. That's how memory peculiarities work. Michael remembered the names of medications perfectly and was proficient in various therapies. But simple memories from everyday life could not be uncovered. And then Michael had an idea. He asked if Emily remembered the address of the house, and Emily clearly replied that yes, of course she did. Michael then suggested that they go to her house together so that she could visit her husband and find out why he had disappeared from her sight. Emily liked the idea very much. It came as a pleasant surprise to her, and that afternoon at lunchtime they drove to the address. The car slowly parked in the yard. Emily stepped outside and looked around the high-rise building. She was a little nervous because she couldn't know in advance what to expect. Michael got out of the car and offered to go up with her, but Emily declined, saying that she could handle it on her own. He agreed. Emily slowly began to climb up the stairs. Her heart raced with each step up the stairs. When she reached the familiar door with the two numbers 2 and 7 attached to it, she pressed the bell and was ushered in. She pressed the bell and licked her lips in anticipation. She mouthed to herself several times the words she would say to her husband when she met him. All those memories and the days she'd spent with John came vividly back to her mind. She held no grudge against him, but she wanted only one thing: to see him, to talk to him about everything. There was so much she wanted to tell him. She took a breath in and out and pressed the bell, then adjusted her collar and ran her hand through her hair a couple times. Finally, footsteps were heard outside the door, and the next moment the door opened. Instead of John's expected face, Emily saw before her the girl who had been present in her memories. Emily remembered that this was John's brother's girlfriend, so she smiled at her. "Hi, can I come in?" Emily asked, and her voice sounded unsure. The lady who'd opened the door for her wasn't exactly welcoming. She gave her a scornful look and, without saying a word, wanted to close the door in Emily's face. But she had the courage to hold on to the handle. "Ashley, I don't understand you. What's going on?" "I can't go into my own house?" she asked again. "What do you want here?" "This is already my apartment," the new landlady shocked Emily with her words. She grinned, asking if she was joking. After all, Emily hadn't gotten anything wrong. Emily was sure this was her apartment. "Liz, you must be confused about something. It's me, Emily, John's wife. And he's home right now. I need to talk to him." Saying that, she pushed Ashley away and entered the apartment. The latter realized that she would have to make an effort before this fool would realize that she was no one else here. Emily entered the apartment, looking in every room, wanting to find John, but he was nowhere to be found. "What's going on here? Where is John? What's wrong with him?" demandingly asked the guest. "And that's none of your business," Ashley replied rudely. She realized she wasn't going to get rid of her that easily. But the insolent lady had a trump card in her hand. Without a second thought, Ashley went to the closet, pulled out a file folder, threw it on the table, and unfolded it in front of Emily on the right page. "Here, look, everything you wanted to know is printed in black letters in white." Read as much as you can. Saying this, she stepped back a little, crossing her arms over her chest. Emily began to cursorily study the documents with her eyes. The more she read each line, the more horrified she became by the minute. Her eyes rounded. She really didn't know what to say to that. "But how did this happen?" she asked, raising her eyes to Ashley. She silently held out her right hand in front of her. A ring sparkled on her ring finger. "That's not true." "You're lying," Emily said in a raised voice, wishing it was all a lie. "I did call John, didn't I? His phone was off exactly the same as yours." Emily spoke the last words slowly, as if she'd just realized what was wrong. "Did you really set this whole thing up?" Emily questioned. But it was probably rhetorical. Ashley wasn't going to answer her at all. "I don't have to explain anything to you. Whatever you need, I've answered it. I've shown you the documents. Now, if you would be so kind as to leave my apartment," Ashley mumbled and walked to the door, opening it to get Emily out as quickly as possible. But as soon as she opened the door, she was immediately confronted by John. Her surprise took her breath away. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came to mind. But John, seeing his ex-wife behind her, who was standing on her own 2 feet and looking fine, was taken aback. "Emily," he said her name as if he hadn't expected it. Emily looked up at him and her eyes involuntarily began to fill with tears. John immediately took a few steps toward her, wanting to hug her, but Emily pulled back for some reason. "Emily, I'll explain everything to you. I was told you were transferred to another facility. I looked for you, but no one could figure out what I was asking of them. I can't believe it. You've recovered," he spoke the words. Emily listened to him, not knowing what to say back, as if it was too late to try to clarify anything now. "Oh God, Emily. Oh God, I'm so sorry," John was saying. Then suddenly he threw himself at her feet. Emily was completely confused. She didn't know what was happening. How could she be so abruptly left without everything? But at the same time she couldn't see her husband, whom she still loved, suffer. "You weakling," Ashley pronounced. She did not recognize the manifestation of human feeling. She believed and was firmly convinced that it was merely a manifestation of weakness of character. Emily told John that she had tried to let him know about her health, but his phone had been off the whole time. John gave her a surprised look, because he was the one who had been calling Emily, and her phone was always busy. He immediately pulled it out and called his ex-wife again. As stated earlier, the answering machine answered. John then went into his phone settings and discovered that someone had blacklisted Emily's phone and had also set a call barring on that number. The first thing John did was turn to Ashley and gave her a questioning stare. She stood there with a nonchalant look. She masterfully kept her mask on, trying not to give herself away. "Okay, John, it doesn't make any sense now," Emily said. "You have a whole new life now, a new wife, a new family. You've even managed to sign the apartment over to her. I'm going to leave, no matter how much you cry here. It's all the same. John's long since fallen out of love with her and started a new life." "What are you talking about?" "I didn't rewrite anything to anyone," the man protested. Emily told him that the document said otherwise, and then asked Ashley to show him the new property certificate again. He didn't believe her, and when he saw the folder of documents in his current wife's hands, he asked to see them. "What a fool you are," she said, grinning. This surprised John even more, who had never seen Ashley in such a role before. "Here. You can watch as long as you want, can't you?" she said mockingly. John took the folder, found the necessary documents, and indeed found there a certificate that his apartment belonged to her. Next, he found another document with his signature on it. The man remembered the day when he was drunk and Ashley had approached him asking him to sign as a trustee. She had said at the time that it was being asked for at the women's health clinic. And then it hit John, it turns out there was no baby in question. And Ashley set this whole thing up just to get a new resource. "Why don't you tell me why you did it?" John asked her. His eyes were filled with horror and indignation. Ashley was starting to get angry. She didn't like being asked to justify herself. It had been a habit ever since she'd been living with William George. He always asked her to account for herself, and often punished her severely. When she tried to lie to him, he was about to call the police to have them both thrown out the door. But at that very moment the doorbell rang, and since the door was unlocked, the guests didn't wait for their hosts to arrive. Michael appeared on the doorstep, and he wasn't alone, he was with the police. Ashley realized there was no escape. How could it be? She miscalculated. She was sure that on the day Michael was supposed to take the plane to Germany, she had put a substance in his coffee in the morning that would cause spontaneity and fainting. She didn't spare the substance then, and poured a lot of it in. Michael had breakfast, drank coffee, and only at the airport he began to feel unwell. He felt dizzy and began to see people who didn't exist. He felt nauseous and went to the toilet. That's where he lost consciousness. He was found only a few hours later. By that time, the plane had long since landed in another country, completely forgetting about the security guard. The police chose to keep silent about the fact that he remained alive. There have been many times crimes of this nature in the city, and the police decided to bring this case to the end and find the culprit, who every time acts according to the same scenario and always gets away with it. Michael remembered everything perfectly. He remembered Ashley, and that he had a brother John and a wife Emily. In order for him to work and not be too conspicuous, he was placed in hospice care where he met Emily. How hard it was for him to keep himself in check so he wouldn't give himself away. The police tried to work on his appearance to make it less recognizable. Special inserts on the movable eyelid and a false chin with a beard and mustache had done the trick. That's why Emily couldn't figure out who was standing in front of her. The police were careful not to spook Ashley. And when Emily and Michael went to her house, the police were already there. And there was nowhere for the perpetrator to go. Ashley was handcuffed and taken to the station. She was not going to be responsible for this alone, and that's why she told everything about William George. But he was more cunning and managed to escape abroad. John and Emily Johnson talked about a lot of things. They had a lot to discuss, found the strength to forgive each other and start living again. And as for Michael, he continued his work as a doctor, putting in his piggy bank of experience one more unique case. It can't be. I robbed her of her money, the ex-husband froze when he saw his rich wife on TV. In one of Jersey City's parks, children were frolicking, couples were strolling, and young mothers with strollers were relaxing after household chores. Christopher stood by a small fountain, holding a single rose. His hands were trembling with excitement. The young, handsome 20-year-old was waiting for his girlfriend Allison, who was already 20 minutes late. She can't not show up, the young man thought to himself. Christopher had been dating Allison for a couple months now, and he'd never had her late or ignore a meeting. Finally, he saw her thin silhouette in the distance. She wasn't walking, she was floating down the road. Her gait was so graceful and airy. Christopher was tired of waiting for the time to come. He walked towards her, and as soon as the girl approached, Christopher noticed that the expression on her face was sad. "What's wrong?" he asked. "I knew you had some kind of misfortune." Christopher was worried and hugged his favorite girl. Allison didn't hug him back and didn't take the flower. The girl, embarrassed, didn't want to tell the reason for her sadness. Christopher looked her straight in the eyes and asked her to keep quiet. "I'm beginning to worry," he said. "Is your grief so great that you can't even share it with me?" "My grief is you," Allison said, and looked up at Christopher. He tensed. He hadn't done her any harm, hadn't hurt her in any way. He was generally trying to do his best to make Allison happy. He asked for clarification on exactly how he could have spoiled his beloved's mood. "You're very nice, but I'm tired of walking in parks and sitting on benches," Allison said. "You've never once invited me to a restaurant, never given me anything but these roses. You realize I need a man around me, not a boy. There's no hope for you. I can't see you as my rock." "You can just say you don't want to have a relationship with a poor man," Christopher said. The boy was insulted, humiliated, and angry. Because of this, he himself was well aware that he had no money. Christopher couldn't give Allison an expensive gift, invite her even to a movie. That would undoubtedly do a lot of damage to his wallet. "How can I have money if I'm only 20? Christopher didn't understand. "We still have a long way to go. You and I are going to grow and develop together." Allison waved her head. "I don't want to wait, I don't want to grow. And I don't want to drag anyone forward," she replied. "I want a grown-up, established man." Christopher didn't seem like the kind of man who could ever accomplish anything. Her words cut him to the core. 10 years had passed since then, and he still hadn't forgotten Allison's words. He never met that girl again. How she turned out, he didn't know. But Christopher had learned that all women were only after money, and no one was interested in sincere feelings. Allison gave him a prejudice against all girls at once. Christopher could not build a serious relationship and did not even try to get close to anyone for quite a long time. By the way, there was some truth in Allison's statement. Christopher really did not aspire to a lot of money. He had misunderstood the girl. She wasn't saying that the guy was indigent and couldn't do anything in this life. She just wanted a different standard of living. She wanted to live a rich life, and Christopher could only give her an average one. She tried to explain this to him, but it was all pointless. Christopher wasn't looking for a big paycheck. He was the kind of man who believed that big money could not be earned by honest labor. So he didn't even try. He always said that rich people were either lucky or crooks. But he never thought he would fall into one of those categories, or maybe both. Christopher was already 30 years old when he met Elizabeth. He was working at a car repair shop, and an expensive car had been brought to him. It was the kind of brand their auto repair shop had never seen before. When Christopher saw the owner of the car, his jaw nearly dropped to the floor. Elizabeth noticed the surprise. She was even pleased. The young businesswoman herself offered Christopher her phone number. She didn't look at the lack of men. She could take care of herself and fulfill her own desires. And Christopher thought for the first time that with a girl like Elizabeth, he could try to build something serious. Elizabeth certainly didn't seem mercantile to him in this situation. Rather, he was becoming a keeper. Of course, the man did not assume that a rich girl could consider him as a potential fiancé. But already after the first date, it was clear that Elizabeth was not looking for a one-night stand. Although she was rich, she did not have the main treasure. She was lonely. But it couldn't be said that Christopher was her last option. No, she did take an interest in the simple car mechanic. And Christopher fell in love with Elizabeth. And not just for the money. 6 months into their relationship, he and Elizabeth were married. One day the man caught himself thinking that he was the lucky man he had thought of with contempt throughout his life. The man himself did not seem to have fully realized what he loved more than Elizabeth herself, or the life she had provided for him. And Elizabeth had spared nothing for the one she loved. Christopher no longer needed to work at the auto shop. He was learning the intricacies of running a business. Elizabeth thought about giving him his own car service for their anniversary. But for now, it was just a thought. In principle, she was happy with everything as it was. She was just worried that her spouse might consider himself uncomfortable with the fact that he lived at his wife's expense. But Christopher didn't feel any inferiority. He was more than happy with everything. Elizabeth and Christopher decided to celebrate the first anniversary of their marriage alone with each other without any lavish festivities. The couple booked a table at a restaurant. Before that, they took a boat ride. It was a day just for the two of them. But their plans were not destined to materialize. Throughout the day, Elizabeth received calls from her assistant, Ben. The young man couldn't get through. First, Elizabeth hung up, and then she turned off the phone so that nothing distracted her from communicating with her husband. Ben wrote messages that went unanswered. Eventually, he found out that his boss was celebrating her anniversary at a restaurant, so she was ignoring his calls. Ben had a lot of reasons to worry, and some pretty serious ones. There was no putting off the conversation. In the middle of the evening, when Elizabeth and Christopher were about to exchange gifts, her assistant burst into the restaurant. The girl still hadn't gotten the papers for the car service she was going to present to her spouse. "Elizabeth Igorevna, we agreed with you that if I call more than 3 times, it means that there is trouble," Ben said, panting. He was obviously running to the boss with all his legs. That was why his breathing was labored. Well, what could have been so serious on Saturday, Elizabeth didn't understand. If it was really urgent, you could have written a message and then called. The assistant replied that it wasn't just urgent, it was an emergency. He offered to step aside and talk, but Elizabeth told him she had no secrets from her husband. "You're due for an inspection on Monday," Ben told her. "And it will be the kind of inspection that will find exactly what it's looking for," he added. "We've been through so many of these inspections already that it's simply impossible to intimidate me with them," Elizabeth replied with a laugh. She always used this particular form of her employee's name when she wanted to show that she considered his words to be a mere trifle. "We've been set up this time," Ben said seriously. "Your partner, with whom, let's face it, we weren't exactly working a clean scheme, has been cooperating with the police and with the IRS. He himself was recently nailed, which is why he wants to pull you out after him." Elizabeth tensed. She was starting to worry now, too. She wanted to hug Ben, to thank him for being able to find her after all. But there was no time for tenderness. She needed to find out what Elizabeth was in danger of being tested, and what she could do to avoid the consequences. "Unfortunately, Elizabeth, it could get you jail time," Ben said without joy at all. "And there is only one way to avoid it." Elizabeth was literally numbed by the words of her assistant. She had never expected that one of her business partners could set her up so seriously. The girl conducted her business honestly, without gray schemes and fraud. And she always trusted her partners. It turns out that it was someone's planned scheme to get her out of the game. Ben said that the person who set it all up agreed to go along with it only if Elizabeth would hand over the business to him. But she'd still have to face an audit from the IRS. How can I get out of this situation? Elizabeth didn't understand. You said there was an option, but I don't see any way out. I can't give my business to someone I don't know. Unfortunately, if you don't sign over all your assets to someone else, you'll be ruined, Ben said. Christopher sat silent the whole time. He didn't understand anything about his wife's affairs. The only thing he could realize was that she was in deep trouble. Elizabeth was crying bitterly, completely confused. Christopher stood next to his beloved and hugged her. The girl clung to his arm. But you can sign everything over to someone you trust, Ben suggested. We'll declare you bankrupt. If you don't have anything, there's nothing to take away. It's better to hand everything over to someone close to you than to an obscure character who just wants to make a profit at your expense. Elizabeth raised her tearful eyes to the assistant, looking at him as if her whole life depended on his words. She was so depressed and frightened that she was unable to think straight. Ben had caught the boss by surprise at a moment when she was as happy and relaxed as possible. The news of the impending setup had stunned her. That's what the man was counting on. At any other moment, the girl would have realized that this was some kind of divorce, but now she didn't see the illogic and inconsistency in his words. You can sign everything over to your parents or to your next of kin, Ben reasoned. Or someone you trust. Maybe someone from the company? You know very well that I have no parents, no brothers, no sisters, Elizabeth answered him. She thought Ben was alluding to himself, but he might not have counted on it because Elizabeth couldn't trust him at that moment. She continued to hold Christopher's hand and suddenly realized, I'll sign the company over to my husband now, she said. That won't arouse suspicion. But the husband is also a close relative, Ben said. Elizabeth looked at Christopher and asked him if he would be willing to take on that responsibility. Ben looked displeased. He was clearly expecting the company to go to him. Christopher didn't answer anything, just froze in one pose, as if he wanted to avoid being noticed. Either I go to prison, Elizabeth said. But if your husband doesn't want to be involved in your affairs, we can think about it, Ben added uncertainly. He agrees, Elizabeth said without looking at the assistant. Well, I guess he does, Christopher said uncertainly. It's like I don't have a choice. I will prepare all the documents and come to your house tomorrow to sign them, Ben said quickly. The assistant congratulated Elizabeth and Christopher on their anniversary, wished them a good evening, and hurried away. At last he looked very intently at Christopher. The man could not decipher the emotion that lurked in his gaze. A calm and happy continuation of the evening was out of the question. Elizabeth didn't bother to give her gift. The next morning Ben came even earlier than Elizabeth and Christopher had time to clean up. The aide had to wait, and at breakfast they sat down together at the table. I thought a lot about what you said last night, Elizabeth said while Ben was preparing the papers. She had indeed thought about what the assistant had told her, but she didn't analyze his words. Didn't try to find a setup. Elizabeth was thinking about exactly how she could avoid the consequences. It seemed to her that simply transferring the company to her husband was not enough. Christopher and I should probably get a divorce, she said. Christopher immediately rose from his seat. Ben darted his eyes at his boss. So what do you think? Do you think the IRS employs fools? Elizabeth reasoned. They won't realize we just redid the paperwork when they smell something fishy. If we're divorced, there'll be fewer questions. Don't worry and don't do anything rash, Ben cautioned Elizabeth. First of all, we'll do it retroactively. Secondly, we need it more for the competitor than for verification. After all, he wants to deal with you specifically, not your case. Liz. I don't like this, said Christopher, who had just been standing there. I'm definitely not getting a divorce. Elizabeth sighed, waving her hand. Give me your papers, she said. Doombly, she leafed through a couple of documents, but more for the sake of appearances, she didn't even read what was written there. She had no reason not to trust Ben. They'd been working together for years. The documents are signed. The assistant put everything in a folder and promised to straighten everything out. Expect my call with good news, Ben said. Elizabeth thanked him and finally touched her cup of coffee, which had already managed to become cold. By evening, it had come to Elizabeth's attention that she hadn't gotten herself a copy of the paperwork, that the whole thing was kind of weird in general. In short, Elizabeth began to realize that she had made a mistake. She quickly grabbed her phone and texted her assistant to bring or courier her a copy of the contract. "You don't look well at all," said Christopher, who was suddenly at Elizabeth's side. "I suggest you have a glass of your favorite wine and calm down." He took out a bottle and a glass, quickly filled it, and handed it to his wife. Elizabeth took the drink, thanking him. She stared at one point and thought about something of her own. "I think I did the stupidest thing of my life today," she said quietly and took a sip. "You're just nervous, aren't you?" Christopher tried to reassure her. "You've been thinking about it all day, so you've been having strange thoughts. Have some wine, lie down and rest. Today is done, and tomorrow there will be other things to do. New worries, fresh thoughts." Elizabeth asked Christopher to sit down next to her. As soon as he lowered himself onto the couch, the girl laid her head on his shoulder. She was swollen from just one sip, immediately pulled to sleep. "You're right. I'm so tired that I don't know what I'm thinking. My eyes are closing," Elizabeth said. "Don't fight it," Christopher said, stroking her head. "You need to rest. You didn't sleep much the night before. You've been on edge all day today, so take care of yourself." Elizabeth relaxed in the warm embrace of her lover, took a couple more sips, set the glass on the small table near the sofa, then returned her head to her husband's shoulder and gradually slid into his lap. Christopher continued to stroke Elizabeth's hair and tell her that everything would be all right. He was scared himself, but he held on for the sake of keeping Elizabeth from worrying even more. Someone had to keep a cool head. Elizabeth hadn't opened her eyes yet, but she already realized something was wrong. Her head ached as if she had emptied several bottles of wine last night instead of just a few sips. She didn't want to open her eyes, so Elizabeth decided to sleep a little longer. She rolled over onto her other side and froze. She realized she wasn't in her own bed because she felt a huge, hard pillow under her head. It was like the one her grandmother had in the village. Elizabeth had always thought it weighed 50 pounds and could kill someone if she wanted to. In her house, there were no such pillows in any bedroom. No sofa could have such a thing. Her cheek was stabbed and feathery. And that feeling, too, was from a distant childhood. Elizabeth remembered perfectly well how unpleasant it was to show the sharp tips of feathers through pillowcases, and she would pull them out of the fabric and examine them. And Granny would scold every time she found a pile of those feathers and fluff under the bed. Elizabeth still risked opening her eyes. She couldn't lie there forever and avoid reality. The room was dusky, but there was a glimpse of sunlight through the thick curtains, indicating that the time had definitely passed the afternoon. The girl did not realize where she was. She couldn't see the room, only a thin line of light from the window, which showed dust particles flying around the room. Elizabeth got out of bed, sliding the curtains open. Outside the window, she saw a wooden fence and a lot of bushes of some kind. It felt like she was at a country house or in a village. She even thought she heard cows mooing somewhere in the distance. Elizabeth slowly turned around in the room and guessed from the furnishings that she had actually found herself in an incomprehensible way in a poor village cottage. The room contained the bed from which the girl had risen a few minutes ago, a stove, a table with a white tablecloth, and a closet. Elizabeth did not understand anything. Never before had she been in this place. How had she ended up here in the first place? The last thing Elizabeth remembered from last night was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine and her husband Christopher beside her. There was no way she could have drunk so much to completely forget everything. Elizabeth didn't have her ID or phone with her. She stayed in the homemade clothes she had been wearing yesterday. How she had gotten to this place was unclear, but one thing was clear: she had to go home. Elizabeth walked towards the exit. When she left the room, she found herself in the kitchen, which was also a hallway. Near the door, she noticed her suitcase, immediately opened it. Inside were several things that someone had hastily left. They were not folded, they were lying in a heap. In a separate pocket lay a passport and a few other documents. Very interesting, Elizabeth stretched out. Did I run away from home or something? Apparently something happened yesterday that made me run away from home. but I couldn't reconstruct the events of the previous day at all. All I remembered was the evening by the fireplace, my head on Christopher's shoulder, and the glass in front of me. I only took a couple sips. There was no way that amount of alcohol could have caused my memory loss. Elizabeth rummaged through more of her suitcase, hoping to find a cell phone there. But there was nothing there. Without that gadget, the girl certainly wouldn't run. She couldn't imagine her life without a smartphone at all. Elizabeth stepped outside. The sunlight hurt her eyes, which were used to semi-darkness. The girl put her palm to her forehead to cover herself a little from the sun and looked around. There were several other huts nearby, as poor and dilapidated as the one in which she had awakened. Some of the huts were definitely abandoned, but the closest one was clearly inhabited. And suddenly Elizabeth noticed an old woman sitting on a bench in the yard of a neighboring house. The girl decided that she could help her. In fact, Elizabeth was very happy when she saw someone alive in the middle of nowhere. She immediately ran up to her neighbor. As she got closer, Elizabeth discovered that the neighbor was not the infirm old woman she had thought she was at first sight. It was just that she was dressed in a very rustic way that gave age. "How do you do?" Elizabeth said. "I apologize for disturbing you, but could you tell me where I am and how I came to be here?" The neighbor looked at her carefully. The woman's eyes were so pale, as if transparent. She seemed to know something, but she was in no hurry to tell. "My name is Elizabeth," she introduced herself, thinking it would help her to make the old woman feel at ease. "She's alive after all," the neighbor suddenly said, which completely disconcerted Elizabeth. "I saw them bringing you in yesterday. I thought they were trying to close the crime. I almost called the police. But there's no cell phone service here." Elizabeth asked the woman to tell her what she'd seen, and then remembered to get the stranger's name. "My name is Mary Adams," the neighbor replied. "I suffer from insomnia. I couldn't sleep last night, and then I heard something. It was late at night. A car came to the window. The car was parked in front of the neighbor's house," said Mary. "I thought my old lady was coming back. But no. 2 men got out of the car, carried you in their arms, carried you into the house, and drove away." Elizabeth, barely able to stay on her feet, asked Mary to describe the men. "I know it was dark, but can you remember anything? Or the make of the car?" Elizabeth asked, folding her arms across her chest in a gesture of pleading. "I could see clearly. They were shining their headlights so bright that half the village could see them," Mary Adams replied, describing the 2 men who had carried Elizabeth into the house. The girl listened to Mary and could not believe her ears, trying to find some excuses and explanations. She hoped the old woman was wrong after all, but there could be no doubt. After the neighbor described the car, Elizabeth was already sure that her husband and her assistant had brought her here. But how was that possible? Elizabeth didn't even know they knew each other. To her mind, the whole thing was just unthinkable. "Did they talk about anything?" she asked. "I can't tell you that now," Mary Adams replied. "I see well for my age, but I don't hear very well. Not even a little," the old woman said guiltily. It was impossible to hear anything. Elizabeth thanked her neighbor once again, went back to her new home. Mary Adams shouted to her that the house was abandoned, so she could stay there as long as she saw fit. "And you can come and see me. I'm the only one living here," she added. "Thanks, but I'm going into town. By the way, can you tell me how to get there?" Elizabeth stopped and asked. The girl stood at the bus stop and borrowed some money from Mary Adams for transportation. She left her things with her too, because she didn't want to carry a suitcase. All she took with her was her passport. She had to walk to her house, which was in the most remote part of the city. Her cottage was located in a place that was considered elite. It was something like a village for the rich. The only way to get there was with a pass, which Elizabeth didn't have with her, of course. But the guard at the gate let her in for old time's sake. What confused her was that he did so reluctantly. "Peter Stephen, have you already forgotten me for one night?" Elizabeth joked. But all she got in response was the guard's embarrassment and a guilty look. "You will go to the house and find out everything there. I'm forbidden to let you in, and I'll probably get a lot for disobeying orders," Peter replied after a long pause. Elizabeth did not understand anything, although she was beginning to guess. Only yesterday she had signed the papers transferring her business to her husband. and today she had been chased out of the house. The only thing she couldn't understand was why she wasn't allowed in the house. It had nothing to do with the company anymore. Elizabeth rang the bell. At the gate, the door was opened by an unfamiliar man. It was the guard. Elizabeth guessed from the uniform. "This is my house. Let me in," she said calmly. "Not true. The mistress is home now." The guard answered her. "This is the first time I've ever seen you." "No wonder, since it's the first day you've worked here." Elizabeth laughed nervously. "Get out of my way. I'm the boss." Just then Elizabeth noticed a young girl behind the guard. She was strolling across the courtyard in an icy silk robe. Elizabeth couldn't stand it. She tried to lunge at the imposter, but the guard grabbed the girl and threw her straight to the ground. "What's going on here?" Elizabeth screamed. "I'm in some parallel universe." The girl, who was strolling through the courtyard, noticed the guest, walked smoothly to the gate, and looked at Elizabeth haughtily. "This is my home now," said the stranger, smiling smugly. "And Christopher is mine at last. And you can go wherever you like, but don't set foot here again." So Elizabeth wasn't crazy. It was all Christopher's doing. That was Elizabeth's suspicion, but she couldn't understand why she didn't own the house either. The only place she could find out the truth was in her office. That's where Elizabeth decided to go. She had to walk again, because she didn't even have money for a cab. She was terrified of being kicked out of her own company, but she had to talk to her husband, no matter what it took. She approached the building where her office was located, noticing that the guards had changed there as well. When only he had time to organize all this, the girl wondered. She had already guessed that she wouldn't be allowed in here now either. But she had to talk to Christopher at any cost. She was lucky she saw that her car, which apparently didn't belong to her anymore either, had pulled into the parking lot. Christopher got out of the car, wearing a nice business suit and a very satisfied look on his face. His face showed that he felt he was the ruler of the world. "He's getting into character fast," Elizabeth thought. She ran up to the bridge, jumped on him from behind and started hitting him on the shoulders, on the head, shouting insults, while the passers-by watched with interest. The guards ran out of the building and took Elizabeth off Christopher's back. The girl, mad with anger, waved her hand at them, saying, "It's okay, he'll sort it out." But as soon as the guard let Elizabeth go, she threw herself at her husband again and began to beat him with her palms. She didn't know how to fight. She just swung her arms left and right, not even looking where she was hitting. One of the guards grabbed her by the waist, and Elizabeth continued to flail her arms and legs like a bug that has fallen on its back and can't turn over. "I understand your anger, but don't embarrass yourself," Christopher said. "Why are you driving my car? Is there a girl walking around in my house?" Elizabeth shouted. "I've already realized that you've taken the company away from me, but what does that have to do with the property?" "You should have read the documents you signed more carefully," Christopher said calmly. Elizabeth froze. She was no longer hysterical. She realized that she had signed over everything to him. She had no chance of getting anything back. "Was your mistress in the house?" she asked with a hint of contempt. "How long have you been with her?" "It doesn't matter," Christopher said. "Get out of here before they force you out. You're free to go. The divorce petition has already been filed." Elizabeth was released. She didn't throw herself. She stayed where she was and just watched her traitorous husband go to her office, where he would run her business, live in her house and drive her car. She was so stunned by her spouse's insolence and meanness that she couldn't cry or get angry, nothing. And then she noticed Ben coming out of the office. The former assistant was obviously in a great mood, walking almost at a gallop. Elizabeth rushed over to him. "Why did you do that?" she asked, grabbing Ben by his jacket. He was scared. He hadn't expected to see his former boss. He tried to say something, but he couldn't get a complete sentence out of his mouth out of excitement. He said he didn't know anything, that it was all Christopher's plan, and he wasn't lying about the tests. They were indeed planned. "How could you not know when you brought me documents to sign that said I was giving my husband all my assets? Did you deliberately frame your speeches to confuse me as much as possible? To panic me?" "I really didn't know." They slipped me the wrong papers. Ben continued to lie. He brought me into the house. Elizabeth came by with Christopher. Did the neighbor see you? Stop lying to me. You set this whole thing up together. By the way, why don't I remember anything? Guilt. I was interrupted. Ben lowered his eyes. He realized that there was no point in lying anymore. His complicity in this crime was obvious. And then behind the man's back, some girl screamed. Oh, brother. Elizabeth recognized that voice at once. It was that thin, gentle voice that had told her hours ago that she was no longer welcome in the house. Ben's face showed that he was not happy with the situation. He didn't want his former boss to know his motives for this deception. So that's what this is all about, Elizabeth said when she saw the girl. It's your sister. Have you taken care of the family welfare? Elizabeth, you were told to leave. Go on your way, Ben said when he realized there was no point in hiding anymore. You can't prove anything. If you go to the police, they'll send you straight to forensics. Elizabeth didn't understand. What kind of examination would they send her to? But Ben quickly explained to her that she had blacked out the day before for a reason. The girl had already guessed that something had been spiked in her wine, and the assistant confirmed it. The police have been alerted to your case. Unless you want to end your days in a mental institution or behind bars, you'd better not go to the police, Ben warned her. You've done your homework, Elizabeth said through gritted teeth, clenching her fists. Ben's sister, Sandy, hid behind him because she saw Elizabeth's fighting spirit, but her brother reassured her. Sandy, don't worry. She won't have time to hurt you. The guards are already on standby, he said. Elizabeth decided to take her almost ex-husband's advice and not embarrass herself anymore. She walked Ben and her sister to the door and then kicked her former assistant's car with all her might. Security guards immediately ran out of the office, and Elizabeth rushed out. She stopped when she had run out of strength and there was no pursuit. Elizabeth was literally gasping for breath. She had never run so much and so fast before. If she could escape from the guards, she could not escape from her own thoughts. Elizabeth realized that through her own stupidity and carelessness, she had lost everything she had earned and accumulated through years of hard work. Elizabeth sobbed. She sat upright on the ground, leaning her back against some unremarkable stall. "Girl, are you scaring my customers like this?" said the indignant stall clerk, who had been listening to Elizabeth crying and mumbling to herself for a long time. But when the woman saw Elizabeth, her mood changed. She realized that the poor girl was in trouble. She could tell by the crying. But Elizabeth looked decent, so she was trustworthy. The woman even asked if Elizabeth needed any help. "If it is not difficult to borrow $3 from me for a ticket to the village," said the girl. "I'm asking for a loan. When I have the money, I will definitely pay you back." "Take one," said the woman and handed Elizabeth a bill. "We'll pay it back, or we won't. That's another matter. At least you can buy yourself something to eat." Elizabeth was also ashamed to accept the handout, but she was in no position to refuse it. She promised herself that she would be sure to pay back Mary Adams, who had given her money for her journey from the village. With that saleswoman, she was sure she would find a way out of the hole she had fallen into through her own gullibility and foolishness. Elizabeth returned to the village. She didn't know where else to go. She had no place in the city in which to find shelter, and here some of her belongings remained, and at least one acquaintance who was willing to take in and help was sweet old Mary Adams. "Yes, the boys are very brazen these days," Mrs. Adams said, listening to Elizabeth's story of how she came to be in this village. The girl had bought the cheapest waffles and cake for her neighbor to thank her for her help. They sat in the kitchen drinking tea. Mary Adams was thinking about how she could help the unfortunate girl, and Elizabeth was thinking about how she could get out of her plight. Though she was engaged in business, she had failed to make any useful connections. The girl did not participate in dubious schemes, did not give bribes, so she could not agree with anyone. The partners did not care who ran her company, she herself or her ex-husband. Mary offered Elizabeth to stay the night at her house, but Elizabeth declined. She felt that she had already squeezed the woman too much. There was no light in the house Christopher and Ben had put her in, but Elizabeth didn't need it. She lit a candle she'd also borrowed from a neighbor. It was enough. It seemed to Elizabeth that she would not be able to sleep and would think about her problems all night. but her strength left her, and she fell asleep as soon as she put her head on the pillow. In the morning, Elizabeth decided to make some improvements to her new home. There was no telling how long she would have to spend here. She wanted to create some semblance of comfort. For the first time, she noticed the decoration of the room. The house seemed to have been abandoned not too long ago. Dust had already accumulated on the shelves, but it didn't look like it had been there for years. In the kitchen drawers, there were still packets of pasta, cereal with expiration dates that hadn't expired. The first thing Elizabeth did was dust. She decided to find a rag and suddenly noticed a note in the most prominent place in front of the front door. She assumed it was a message from her ex-husband to her. With trembling hands, she took the note, began to read it, and from the very first line she realized that the letter was not meant for her. It began with the words, "My dear daughter." Her mother had died a long time ago. She couldn't have left a note for her. But Elizabeth didn't stop reading. The letter was from the woman who owned the house to her daughter. She apologized to her, hoping that her daughter might remember her one day, maybe decide to visit. But the former owner of the house had moved away. She gave her daughter an address where she could find her, begged her to come visit her mother. Elizabeth wiped away the tear that rolled down her cheek after reading the message. So much maternal love and pain in those words written in pencil with a trembling hand. The girl wondered what had happened between mother and daughter that they had to separate and cut off contact for several years. Elizabeth could learn the truth from only one person, so she went to him. "I've been waiting for you," Mary Adams exclaimed joyfully when she saw Elizabeth on the doorstep. "I wanted to come to you to ask you to breakfast." The woman didn't seem to be lying. Her table was indeed already set. Fragrant tea, luscious cakes, pancakes, and cottage cheese. Mary Adams must have gotten up very early to prepare a treat for her new acquaintance. Elizabeth even blushed with embarrassment. "Why do you trouble yourself so much?" Elizabeth was modest. "I'm so embarrassed that I barged into your life." "I'm only glad you did," Mary Adams replied animatedly. "I'm all alone with no grandchildren or children. My neighbor left me. It's good to have you here. I feel sorry for you, though. It's not good for you at all." Mary, a little embarrassed by the last sentence, remembered how Elizabeth had cried the day before and worried that she had lost everything she had. But Elizabeth was not offended. On the contrary, she even smiled. "By the way, I wanted to ask you about your previous neighbor." Elizabeth remembered, sitting down at the table, and the dishes gave off such an appetizing aroma that she wanted to start breakfast as soon as possible. Lucy lived in that house. Immediately the memories rushed back to her mind. Mary Adams was a good womankind. She hadn't been gone that long, not even a year. Lucy and her daughter were unlucky. Did they fight a lot? A lot. "That's interesting to me," Elizabeth said and put the note on the table. Mary put on her glasses, picked up the letter, ran her eyes over it quickly. After reading it, she put her glasses back on the table and looked out the window. She seemed to have tears in her eyes as well. Because of such foolishness, frankly, they feared, Mary said after a long pause. Elizabeth had already managed to whip up a couple of pancakes in the meantime. Catherine is Lucy's daughter. She found a young man in town who wasn't young at all and was about 15 years older, probably. But rich. Lucy did not accept such a son-in-law. They called her daughter all sorts of names. But she and her fiancé had come to visit together. That was the last time Catherine visited her mother, and she told her not to show her face here. Elizabeth set aside the pies and pancakes, listened intently to the story. The girl had lost her mother early. She couldn't imagine how one could choose a groom between a fiancé and a family member. Elizabeth could not condemn either mother or daughter. It seemed to her that a compromise should have been made, but it was easy to reason when the situation didn't concern you. Anyway, after a few months, Lucy regretted everything she'd said. The daughter did not answer the phone and did not come to visit, finished the story Mary Adams. And then Lucy decided to move to the city. Hoped that at least there she will have the opportunity to meet with her daughter. But where Catherine went, she didn't know. So now I don't know if they ever met. "Somehow I'm dying to know," Elizabeth said suddenly. "I have the address. I'll go and ask. And at the same time I'll confess that I've taken over her house." Elizabeth was telling the truth. The thought occurred to her as soon as she read the letter. She wanted to hug the poor woman and feel sorry for her. But she didn't have enough money for the journey. The town was farther away from the village than the one Elizabeth lived in. Therefore, the ticket would cost more. But Mary Adams offered to help her again. Elizabeth was embarrassed, but she would not refuse. The girl was still sure that she would not be in this predicament forever. One day she would have the opportunity to pay back everyone who was helping her. Elizabeth went to Lucy's the next morning. She was ready to go earlier, but the bus left only once a day in the early morning. The girl wondered on the way what she would say to the woman, why she had even considered this trip. But the bus was already pulling up to the train station. It was too late to change her mind. It took Elizabeth about 2 hours to find the right address, and now she stood in front of the door to Lucy's apartment. She tentatively pressed the bell, but it didn't work. Elizabeth already thought that this was a sign that she should go back to the village and continue to think about her own problems, and not solve other people's. But no, she hadn't come all this way just to be scared and come back with nothing. Elizabeth still didn't know why she had come here in the first place or what she would say. But she knocked on the door. No one opened, though Elizabeth knocked several times, and for quite a while. She even thought she heard footsteps outside the door, but no one ever opened. Just as Elizabeth turned around, there was a thud in the apartment, as if something or someone had fallen. There was no doubt about it, the sound came from behind the door behind her. Elizabeth couldn't leave, so she risked opening the door to see if anything was wrong in the apartment and if she needed help. The knob came down and the lock opened. Elizabeth pushed the door open and immediately saw a woman on the floor in the hallway. She seemed to be having a stroke. The girl was frightened. She didn't even have a cell phone to call an ambulance. But Lucy pointed to the kitchen. Elizabeth immediately went where the woman showed her and saw a smartphone on the table. The ambulance came 10 minutes later. Elizabeth went with Lucy to the hospital, spent about an hour in the corridor until the doctor came out to her. "She's fine," the doctor said. "You called the paramedics just in time." Elizabeth breathed a sigh of relief, and then the doctor said that they had already spoken to the patient's daughter. They told her that an unknown girl had come to the hospital. Catherine said she'd be here within the hour. "She asked you to wait for her," the doctor said. "I'll wait for her," the doctor said. "I'll wait for her," Elizabeth replied calmly. She had nowhere to be in a hurry. She thought it would be a great opportunity to reconcile mother and daughter. She was even glad that Katie had decided to come after all. She didn't ignore her mother's problems. So it wasn't too late. Katie arrived quickly, less than an hour later. She ran straight to Elizabeth and knelt down in front of her. "Don't be. That's what anyone in my position would do," Elizabeth said, embarrassed. "The doctor said you saved Mom's life," Katie said, getting up from her knees. "I don't know who you are or how you know my mom, but I'm grateful to you. Ask for anything you want." "Come on, I don't need anything. Will you forgive your mother?" Elizabeth said, and handed her the letter she had found in the house. "I didn't go to your mother's house of my own free will. There was this note. It was meant for you, I take it?" Catherine took the sheet, read her mother's message, which had been waiting for almost a year in her home. She couldn't hold back her tears as she read the words written in neat handwriting. Elizabeth noticed the look of guilt, shame, and unspeakable pain in Katie's eyes. "How could I have forgotten about her?" "She could have died alone," Katie said, sinking down on the bench beside Elizabeth. "But how did you end up in her house and apartment?" The doctor reported that Mama had been taken from the city apartment, not the village. Elizabeth was ashamed to admit that she had moved into Lucy's house without her knowledge. But she saw Kathy as a good and kind person who would certainly not judge her. So Elizabeth decided to tell her the whole story from the beginning, so that Katie would have no more questions for her. "It was an accident of fate," Catherine said when Elizabeth had finished her story. "Stay the night at your mother's in the village. You can't leave tonight anyway, and she will be in the hospital for weeks. Tomorrow morning I will come to visit you and we will talk." Elizabeth thanked the kind girl. She really hadn't thought at all about where she would stay. The buses traveled once a day, not only to the city but also from the city. So she could either walk to the village, which would take her a long time, or take a cab, which Elizabeth simply didn't have the money for. Catherine not only allowed her mother's savior to stay with her, but drove her to the familiar driveway. "I'll be there at 9, Katie said goodbye. I hope you won't be asleep by then." Elizabeth re-entered the apartment she had been in for only a few minutes. She found it cozy, but everything about it suggested that it belonged to a lonely and deeply unhappy woman. There were many framed photographs on the shelves. Each picture was of Catherine at a different time in her life. On one was a baby, on another a first grader with puffy brows, on the third already a graduate in a beautiful ball gown. Lucy loved her daughter and missed her in a strange apartment. It wasn't easy for Elizabeth to get comfortable. She had to get used to the idea that she had no corner of her own now. The girl thought a lot about Catherine, what she wanted to talk to her about, but there was no point in guessing. The only thing left to do was to wait until morning to see if Catherine had been deceived. Catherine knocked on the door at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. Elizabeth was surprised that the girl knocked. She was not the mistress of the house, so Catherine could have entered her house unannounced. But Elizabeth even asked permission to enter and clarified exactly where they could set up to talk. "Mother is feeling better and would like to thank you," Catherine said as she sat down at the table in the kitchen. Elizabeth poured tea, but there was nothing else she could offer her guest. She even took the tea bag without asking. "If you don't mind, we'll go to the hospital after we talk," Catherine said. "Of course, I also have to thank your mother after all to get to know her. I'm her lodger." It turned out that Catherine was floundering, did not know how to get to what she wanted to talk about. Elizabeth guessed that Lucy wasn't the topic of conversation. "I remember you telling me your story yesterday," Catherine began to say. "You were running a successful business, and I found some articles about you on the internet. It's amazing that a businesswoman like you could be so foolishly deceived." "I trusted both Ben and my husband," Elizabeth replied, feeling an inexplicable sense of guilt. "I was just intimidated and confused. They were people I didn't expect to be set up at all." "Don't think I'm trying to shame you or make fun of you," Catherine said, as she realized that her words might have sounded like mockery. "Quite the opposite. I would like to discuss some details with you. I have a proposition for you that you'll like, especially given the position you're in." Elizabeth raised her head and squared her shoulders. Her whole appearance showed that she was ready to listen to the terms and offers. Catherine immediately saw in front of her a strong woman, a real businesswoman. Until then, Elizabeth seemed to her as a lost girl. But her ex-husband and assistant could not bury in her a confident businesswoman. "I wasn't, and I'll be honest about it," Catherine said. Before voicing her proposal, or even a request, Catherine told the backstory. She admitted that she married a man who was 18 years older than her. Mary Adams got it a little wrong, but she entered into marriage for love. Catherine also revealed that this was the reason why she and her mom had a fight. Elizabeth was silent about the fact that she was already aware that she was the cause of discord between mother and daughter. 2 months ago, my husband passed away," Catherine said sadly. "No sooner had I recovered from this loss, although not yet, to be honest, as I had to face a new problem, the heirs. Other than our mutual son, only 3 years old, my spouse had no children. His business has passed to me. But I don't understand anything about it. I am afraid that I too could be cheated by assistants and accountants and other employees. Anybody could set me up because I don't understand anything about the paperwork. So I would be very happy if you would become my right hand. Teach me how to run the business and help me get the company out. Because with me at the helm, my late husband's company is going downhill." Elizabeth was pleased that Catherine had decided to entrust her with such a responsible task, even knowing that she herself was dressed like a little girl. She even asked Catherine if she was embarrassed by that fact. "Not at all," Catherine replied calmly. "You've been running a successful business for several years. I read that you built your company from scratch. Why can't you promote an established and successful business? Personal motives played into your business. You were deceived by people close to you. I have a different situation. I'd be happy to help you," Elizabeth agreed. Catherine hugged her new acquaintance, thanked her for this answer, offered Elizabeth to immediately give an advance payment so that she could rent an apartment, settle in for the first time, buy food, new clothes. After the conversation, the girls went to Lucy's hospital, where the woman tearfully thanked Elizabeth for saving her life. But she was even more grateful for reconciling with her daughter. After her first day of work, which was Elizabeth's abbreviated day, she drove to the village. The purpose of the trip was one thing: to talk to Mary Adams, to settle her debts. Elizabeth couldn't even figure out what Mary Adams was happier about, the fact that her new neighbor had done well and found a job, or that Lucy had reconciled with her daughter. The woman did not want to accept money from Elizabeth, but she said she would be offended and would not forgive herself if Mary did not accept her debt. Elizabeth also wanted to visit the stall clerk, who was also kind to her. But she had to go to another town for that, not the one where she had settled. Now she didn't want to spend half a day on the bus, so Elizabeth decided that she would thank her when she bought a car. By the way, she was able to do so after 6 months. All, in the entire 6 months, Elizabeth had almost completely recovered from her collapse. She became not just an assistant and business consultant for Catherine, she became the second person in her company. The girls were able to not only save the business, but powerfully propel it forward. Catherine was well aware that without Elizabeth's help she could not have done it, and therefore generously thanked the girl with a high salary. Elizabeth had not lost her entrepreneurial spirit. She tried not to waste a lot of money. After she bought an apartment and a car, she started saving for her own business. It was not the first time she started from scratch. She'd already managed to start a business once and create a successful construction firm. So she would do it again. It took the girl 3 years to get back on her feet. She was still a long way from her previous fortune, but last time it had taken her years to get her business off the ground. Now, however, things were progressing much faster. Elizabeth did not forget Mary Adams and the saleswoman, who had been kind to her. She had paid off the second one too, and they had even managed to chat. The woman at the stall was named Tatiana, and she told her that she was deeply unhappy. Her own son had died in a hot spot, and she was all alone. Elizabeth had no idea how many lonely women there were in the world. She thought about the fact that there was no one to take care of them. For example, Mary Adams complained that she herself had to chop wood for the winter, shovel snow, go for water. It is not good for an old woman to do such hard labor. When Elizabeth had her own business and money, she thought about creating a foundation. The girl found volunteers who agreed to help old people and single women with hard physical labor on a free basis. The news of such a fund quickly spread around the city. Elizabeth was even interviewed for the regional channel. Christopher got up early to prepare for the meeting. The company wasn't doing as well as Elizabeth. He was nervous. The partners were refusing to cooperate. If at first no one cared who was at the helm of Elizabeth's company, after a while they realized that there was a difference. Christopher had never been a businessman, and things were not going well for him. He couldn't get organized on one level of his company. There was no way Ben could single-handedly pull the firm off the bottom, and so far they were still afloat. But the outlook for the next few years was bleak. Added to the fact that Christopher not only didn't know how to earn money, he spent it recklessly. And he had an assistant in the form of Sandy. This young beauty didn't worry about money at all. The money from her card, and consequently from Christopher's accounts, flew away like leaves from trees in the fall. Christopher had a habit of eating breakfast with the news. It was a habit he'd had since his days at the car service center. He brewed his coffee, set a plate of freshly cooked scrambled eggs in front of him, and turned up the volume on the TV. Just as he took the first sip of the aromatic, invigorating coffee, the drink immediately spurted out in a fountain onto the table. The thing was, he saw a familiar face on the TV. Elizabeth, in an expensive suit, beautifully styled and wearing expensive jewelry, was talking about her charitable foundation. She was definitely doing well. After the interview, the announcer talked about how Elizabeth is a successful entrepreneur and is already moving the local rich people from the top position. How is that possible? I ripped her off. Christopher said out loud. If a man has brains, he is not lost in the world, said Sandy, who had just woken up to the smell of coffee. That can't be said for you. Christopher was furious when he heard his lover's words. He reminded her that she wasn't exactly frugal either and had contributed significantly to their ruin. I thought you were going to be a businessman, she said unashamedly. Money is supposed to work and multiply itself, and for some reason you have only disadvantages. You should learn from your ex. The man could not stand such insults and obvious mockery from the girl, grabbed her by the hair and pushed her out into the street right in her pajamas. She shrieked, begging to be let go, but Christopher couldn't stop. She had hurt him too much with her remarks. Christopher was already thinking that his mistress had stopped seeing boundaries. More than once she had made insulting remarks about Christopher, especially if she didn't have enough money for new jewelry or dresses. Sandy could only demand and judge. It was impossible to get support and help from her. "Come to my place and get your sister out of here," Christopher told Ben over the phone. "What do you mean, take her away?" Ben didn't understand. "Literally, I don't need her anymore. I'm going back to my wife. And Sandy's standing outside the fence in her pajamas. And the longer you drive, the longer she'll have to walk down the street in God's pajamas." Christopher replied and hung up the phone. He wasn't joking or speaking in haste. He really intended to get Elizabeth back. He couldn't handle the business alone. The money would soon run out, and Elizabeth was obviously doing well. He thought that his ex-wife would immediately forgive him and take him back. All the more reason for him to return everything to her, provided she agreed to remarry him. Before leaving for another city, Christopher thought that Ben might harm him in some way. So he decided to fire the assistant and informed him about it by phone. "You realize that without me the end of your empire will come even faster." Ben answered him, who was also furious that his sister had been thrown out on the street like an unwanted kitten. "Don't worry, my ex-wife will fix my affairs," Christopher answered, starting the engine. "She would have fired you anyway. No one would want to work with a traitor." He hung up. Ben looked at his sister, who still couldn't get warm in the car. Did he seriously think Elizabeth would forgive him and welcome him back with open arms? Sandy asked through gritted teeth. "No, of course not. She's not stupid," Ben told her. "But we can try to gain her trust and punish the bastard." "What city does she live in now? Did you see it on the news?" Sandy nodded. Ben smiled and stepped on the gas. He and his sister are going to Elizabeth's place too. Just need to change their sister's clothes first. Ben decided that the mistress shouldn't be taken to see Elizabeth. She would be more able to confide in him without her. Sandy didn't insist. She didn't feel like traveling across town, but she advised her brother to call Elizabeth, because Christopher would definitely be there sooner. Elizabeth enjoyed the beautiful morning. Even though it was getting close to lunchtime, she'd given herself a chance to get some sleep that day. She and Catherine had had a party the night before to celebrate a successful transaction. The peaceful flow of the morning routine was broken by a phone call. Elizabeth had hoped to hear anyone but the man who had left her in the lurch a few years ago. "Ben?" Elizabeth said questioningly. "Did you get the wrong number?" "No. I want to warn you that another man from the past is coming to see you soon," the man said seriously, though his knees were trembling with excitement. "Your ex-husband has found out you're back on the horse and wants to suck on your income. Christopher himself couldn't replicate your success. He's almost out of money." Elizabeth replied that's what she thought. But Ben is worried for nothing. The girl would never forgive her ex-husband in her life, would never believe him. "I understand that." Unlike him, he laughed. "You want to get back at him, don't you? I have an idea." "I'm not surprised you have another plan to trick a man." Elizabeth's former assistant jabbed at him as well. "What I don't understand is, why would you want to do that? I mean, you two are kind of related, and even related." And Ben told him what Christopher had done to him and his sister. So he had a strong motive for revenge, too. Elizabeth still agreed to listen to his plan. She found his arguments convincing. Elizabeth was also attracted to the fact that this time her safety would not be threatened. So this wasn't another scheme to take everything away from her. Elizabeth was even looking forward to hearing from her ex-husband. There was no way Christopher could think of a way for him to show up. He wanted to make sure his ex-spouse didn't guess his intentions, as if he didn't know she was rich again. Christopher tracked Elizabeth down, finding out where she lived and worked. As if by chance, he found himself in the same establishment where Elizabeth got her coffee every morning. "What meeting?" Christopher exclaimed, meeting Elizabeth there. Yes, unexpected indeed, Elizabeth played along, who had long known that her husband was tracking her. The guards had already reported to her a few days ago that a man was following her. Christopher asked Elizabeth how she was doing, telling her that he was doing fine except for his love life. "Wow, your mistress only wanted money." Elizabeth ironically repeated after him. "Is this boomerang coming back to you?" "It's not true, I wasn't with you for money." Christopher answered her resentfully. "Ben and his little sister tricked me. She seduced me, and he put me up to it." Elizabeth nodded, looking understanding. It looked very exaggerated, and Christopher could see the obvious mockery on his ex-wife's part. Nevertheless, he was pleased that she did not stop talking to him, listened immediately, and even entered into a dialogue. All of this Elizabeth had done deliberately. She needed to gain his trust so that Christopher would think she had fallen for his bait again. And she succeeded. After the first meeting, Christopher was sure that after a couple more conversations and dates, he would be a rich woman's husband again. And Elizabeth was happy to play along. Each time she forced herself to communicate with her ex-husband, but she realized that without it, her revenge would not happen. She needed to feign trust and warmth toward a man she couldn't stand. Listening to Christopher's words was simply unbearable for her. She realized that he was a masterful liar, and believe her, he really wanted to deceive. Even though she knew that every word he said was a lie. Christopher was getting more and more turned on because he couldn't tell if Elizabeth trusted him or not. It seemed to him that everything was happening too easily. Immediately, his ex-wife agreed to a date, answered his phone instantly. Was she so starved for a relationship, so lonely that she forgave him so easily? Christopher went on the offensive, sending her gifts, arranging surprises, dates. He thought she was about to melt. Elizabeth stepped over herself when she went to these meetings and smiled sweetly at her traitor husband. She was even more disgusted when she saw Christopher cowering before her, the bastard squealing. "Ben, I'm getting tired of these meetings with my ex-husband. When do we move on to the next phase of the plan?" Elizabeth asked him after another date. "We need to push Christopher into action. Until he's ready to give it all back to you, we're not going to get anywhere," Ben told her. "How do you push him to do that?" "I'm already pretending to be in love and forgiving all the wrongs," Elizabeth clarified. Next to Elizabeth at that moment was Catherine. She came to visit her to discuss personal matters. The girls had become not only business partners, but also best friends. "I have an idea," Catherine said suddenly. Elizabeth immediately put the call on speaker so that Ben could hear her. Men are most afraid of competition. If Christopher found out that Elizabeth had a suitor for his heart, he would immediately move into decisive action. Ben agreed that it was a good idea. As a man, he confirmed it. Katie then informed him that she had a good acquaintance who would agree to help her. Christopher didn't know how to propose to Elizabeth himself. He still doubted that she had finally forgiven him. Suddenly, he received a call on his work phone. Since Ben had been fired, Christopher scheduled all negotiations and meetings by himself. He received a call from a man who introduced himself as a well-known investor, and Christopher knew his name. It was a man named David. This was a weighty figure in their field. Many people knew him, and everyone dreamed of working with this man. Christopher even straightened his back, although the person on the phone still couldn't see him. Christopher prepared for the meeting with the investor as carefully as for a date. Until the last moment, he didn't believe that the David he had in mind would come to the meeting. But his expectations were justified. After a short negotiation, the businessmen shook hands, but David was in no hurry to leave. "Is it true that Elizabeth Agorevna is your ex-wife?" David suddenly asked. Christopher nodded and immediately tensed. This question did not bode well. David said that a friend of his was interested in the woman. "He begged me to find out if Elizabeth had a boyfriend," David said, blushing. "I'm sorry to bring it up." "That's all right," Christopher coughed. "It's good of you to ask. Elizabeth and I are discussing the possibility of starting a family right now. I want to propose to her because our feelings are back." "That's too bad, because my friend was going to take her out tonight," David said. "But then I'll tell him he has nothing to look forward to." "Yes, please do." Christopher's voice became high, like a frightened boy's. Christopher waited until David left the restaurant and immediately called Elizabeth, asking her not to plan anything for the evening. He had a serious conversation to have. Wow, that worked so fast. Elizabeth was surprised. She knew at once that Christopher had prepared a serious conversation. He had dressed like a real groom, prepared a huge bouquet, and was very excited. Elizabeth sank into a chair and showed that she was ready to listen to him. Christopher pulled some papers out of his briefcase, got down on one knee, and handed Elizabeth the ring. "I want it all back," he said, to prove that he was serious. "I have prepared the documents that will give you everything back, everything that I took away. You will be my wife again." Elizabeth did not hurry to take the ring, open the folder with the documents, read them carefully, every line, every word. When she was sure that this time there was no deceit, she put her signature in the right places. "When did you have time to prepare them?" She was surprised. "But I was on my way to you with them," Christopher said. "You can see the date I wrote and signed them. It shows that I'm serious." While Elizabeth read the papers, Christopher remained on one knee with his arm outstretched. He was very worried. But since the girl signed the papers, then the deed is done. "It's a shame that you're giving me back much less than you took," Elizabeth began to say. And Christopher immediately realized that he was too happy too soon. "And I gave you the company in a very different state of mind. But thank you for that. You can offer your ring to Sandy. I don't need anything else from you, if that's what it takes. I'll make a deal with the police, just like you did. I was wiser this time." Elizabeth took the folder with the documents, got up from the table and left the restaurant. Christopher remained sitting on one knee. He could not believe his ears. He now found himself in Elizabeth's shoes. She had tricked him too. A waiter approached Christopher, asking if he wanted to pay the bill. "What bill?" yelled at the kid, furious. "Didn't you see that? Didn't she just take everything from me? How am I supposed to pay for it?" The waiter was startled by this reaction, but kept his cool. He asked the man to calm down and told him that he would have to call security, and maybe even the police if Christopher didn't pull himself together and pay for his order. But he had no intention of calming down. Christopher was furious. He was realizing more and more every second that he had literally become a tramp. He threw all sorts of unflattering words at Elizabeth, who could no longer hear him. He started smashing everything, breaking chairs, tables, and sweeping dishes from the tables of other visitors. But he was quickly calmed down and tied up by the guards. "Christopher, why did you embarrass yourself like that?" "You are a respectable man," said the owner of the restaurant. While the bound Christopher and the staff waited for the police, the man's words echoed in Christopher's mind. He remembered how, years ago, he had asked Elizabeth to calm down and not embarrass herself by throwing her fists at him in the middle of the street. He could understand her pain now, her feelings. Only the girl was much more hurt and offended. She had been robbed of her hard-earned blood and sweat, and he had been robbed of something that had never belonged to him. It was cold and calculated revenge. And Christopher accepted defeat. He decided that now he would definitely settle down, go back to his car service. He could try on a rich life and realize that money doesn't just fall out of the sky. He had everything, but he couldn't save it. When Elizabeth walked out of the restaurant, she raised the folder above her head and shouted with joy. And in the car already waiting for her was Katie, who immediately ran out of the car, hugged her friend. The girls went to celebrate their victory in the club. On the way to the club, Elizabeth called Ben and told him that the deed was done. Christopher was left with nothing, and she got back all her own. The man was pleased with the outcome, even venturing to ask if Elizabeth would hire him again. "No, I've had enough of this once," Elizabeth laughed. "I am grateful for your help. I can send you some money to thank you and pay you for your work, for warning me, but you can't expect more than that. I'm sorry, once a man has betrayed you, you can't trust him." "Only enough talk," exclaimed a happy Katie. We were already at the club. Elizabeth said goodbye, hung up the phone, and looked at the huge building with its thousands of lights on. She had never been to such places, but her friend reassured her that it was a decent place and only rich people vacationed there. And there David was waiting for them. Elizabeth did not know about it. She did not even communicate with him. This Catherine agreed about everything with her friend, and the meeting at the club was organized by her at David's request. The man had long been interested in this young, successful businesswoman. He himself was also young and attractive, but had no success in his personal life. All the girls who literally hung around his neck did not seem worthy to him. Many needed money. Their behavior was not distinguished by modesty. And David wanted to find a decent girl, whom he would see as his future wife and mother of his children. Elizabeth seemed to him just like that, and he fell in love with her at first sight. David later admits to Elizabeth that he could hardly hold a conversation with her ex-husband. He disliked liars and cheaters so much But when he looked at Christopher and realized that this man had caused a lot of pain to this beautiful girl, the urge to punch him in the face was self-inflicted. Catherine didn't bother to tell Elizabeth that David was actually interested in her friend. The girl wasn't sure if her buddy was ready for a relationship. She hadn't promised David anything except that she would introduce them. And the introduction was a success. Elizabeth was in a good mood, smiling, almost bouncing with happiness. And David just couldn't contain his smile as he watched such a happy and therefore even more beautiful Elizabeth. "I owe you one," Elizabeth said happily to David. "How did you manage to convince my ex-husband that I had a boyfriend and he signed everything back over to me the same day?" "Men don't like competition," David answered her with a smile. "But I wasn't lying about your suitor. I do have one." David blushed, but because of the darkness in the club, Elizabeth didn't notice it. The confident, successful man who runs a dozen businesses felt at that moment like a schoolboy shy of talking to a girl. Elizabeth danced and behaved casually, not even realizing that her interlocutor was burning with shame and shaking with embarrassment. "Then introduce me to him. What if this is my destiny?" Elizabeth laughed, who was in a great mood, and said it not seriously, more as a joke. But David literally blossomed before her eyes. When he heard these words, Elizabeth, he began to correct his jacket and hair, and then extended his hand to the girl. Elizabeth stopped dancing at this metamorphosis. She looked at David seriously, trying to determine whether she understood correctly what would happen next. "Then let me introduce myself. I am the admirer," he said with contrived importance. It looked ridiculous again, because the man was terribly shy. He tried to give the impression of a serious man, but his excitement was getting in the way. Elizabeth was confused at this point, but she shook his hand. David was a handsome man, and outwardly Elizabeth was attracted to him. But the girl did not think about serious and non-serious relationships. It seemed to her that after her first marriage, she would remain a loner forever. Catherine watched from the side how her friend and old comrade communicate. She really wanted Elizabeth to find her happiness, and she knew for a fact that David was the perfect match. He would definitely not be with Elizabeth for the money. He is a loyal and decent man. Those were the arguments she made to her friend the next day. Elizabeth embarrassed. She too was well aware of what an important and powerful businessman David was. She couldn't believe she could be looked up to by a man of such high rank. "And you're not an ordinary girl," either Katie told her. "There's nothing to be surprised about. Give David a chance, you'll never meet anyone like him again." And Elizabeth heeded her friend's advice. She went on a few dates with David, accepted gifts and advances from him, and eventually they formed a beautiful couple. A year and a half later, Elizabeth and David became a family. Elizabeth did meet Christopher. It was unexpected. She had a flat tire somewhere on the outskirts of town, namely near a tire shop. Elizabeth even laughed that the owners of the tire shop had put something on the road just to get a customer. Never before had there been such an expensive car in this godforsaken place. Unfortunately, the owner's only employee was a half-drunk Christopher. Elizabeth recognized him immediately and said she wouldn't let him near the car. She called David and asked him to come and get her in the car. But while she waited for her husband, she decided to talk to Christopher. He told her without much enthusiasm that he had been working at the place since he was released from the police. After the debauch in the restaurant, he lived in a dormitory, and the only joy in his life was a bottle of vodka. Christopher watched with hatred and envy as Elizabeth got into David's car and they drove off to their happy life. "To each his own," Christopher said, his voice hoarse with hangover. "And we haven't lived rich. There's no reason to start."